da, 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 da. Okay, I think we've got the technical issues out of the way. For some reason, my mic did not want to initialize, work, call it what you will. I haven't changed a single setting since my last stream, nor have I unplugged it. So, that's a little weird, especially as someone who works in computers for a living. So, fun. I love technology. It loves to just mess with you at times. So hopefully everybody can hear everything good. I'll just kind of glance at chat for a half second, make sure everything's all right, and then we'll get into kind of the announcement section, and then we'll go into the Q&A section. Excuse me. And yeah, clearly the hair and makeup department was very, very busy. Like I'm not even like properly shaved. Not that my camera picks it up all that well. My webcam's too terrible for that. But okay, so let's start with the crazy stuff. If you've watched the community tab, which most of you hardcore people who are here this morning, I know that you do. You know that I'm about to start something. Maybe excessive might be the right word, but let's say ambitious so that it sounds a little fancy, right? I want to do not necessarily like BRS live for those who are used to watching like BRS.TV or whatever, but I kind of want to show people head to head what your dollar buys in some of like the heavyweight class of aquarium lighting. So with that being said, let's talk about what we're looking at. So you guys know that I love the Fluval, and I think the Fluval pound for pound, dollar for dollar is the best light out there. So if we were to compare the Fluval, right, we would look at things like this. These are the Fluval's details for the 36 to 48 inch light, aka the one you put on a 40 breeder. So it uses 46 watts of power. It's at 3,300 lumen. Its color temperatures range between 3,000 and 2,500 Kelvin. It's supposed to get you 50,000 hours of light. And if we look at like a chart, it would look like this. And I know this is all the like the sciencey stuff that's not interesting, but trust me, there's a reason behind this. So this is where you can see like, your far right is where you're in those like lower or the higher Kelvin ranges, sorry. And then you've got the lower Kelvin ranges in the blue, which is kind of strange because normally we would associate warm, like red and orange tone lights with that lower Kelvin. But I'll skip the super sciencey parts that explain that. And then we look at a Fluval by price, right? And if we go to my favorite place, Aquarium Co-op, just because they actually get to do the the minimum advertisable price, the MAP. I'm sure that's not the exact term. I think it's just minimum advertised price. But so for that same light, for the 36 inch light, it's $180. Now the tariffs have gone up, and it's like $25 more than it used to be. Yay, tariffs! I love tariffs. I don't like tariffs. I don't like tariffs. So that's like kind of my baseline. Like I love this light. I think this is a great light and easily attainable for any of us aquarists, right? We don't have to go too crazy to do this. So that's like the next step up as far as price is concerned. Not necessarily performance, but price. And that's going to be into, say, like the Kessel A160 Tuna Sun. So their details are like this. So they go from 6,000 to 9,000 Kelvin, a much smaller Kelvin range. They're like, you can see their power supply. Who cares about that? But they only use 40 watts of power instead of 46, which is kind of interesting. And then like they cover a 24-inch surface round, basically put. It's like a spotlight, right? So instead of the like 36-inch by basically 18 inches that a Fluval light can cover, this is only giving you a 24-inch round. But it has that cool shimmer effect, and you can do some interesting things with its adjustable color temperatures and all that kind of nonsense. But if we get into like the light chart, just so you see that comparison, and I know that this is sciencey and it might put you to sleep early this morning, but there is a reason behind this. Trust me. So we can see the curve is really similar to the fluval light. It just doesn't push as far out in like the Kelvin wavelength range. But then we look at the price of one of these things, and like just the light, no hanger. So like, you know, everybody loves like the goosenecks or some of the other stuff. $240 light for 24 inches of coverage. So it won't even cover a full 40 breeder, technically speaking, and it's $60 more than a fluval light? Okay, then let's go real crazy, right? So the UNS Titan. Let's just look at its details before we look at the real scary part of this thing. And in a sec, I'm going to say hi to a bunch of folks just because I know that, you know, live stream, we love saying hi, right? But here's where the killer is on this thing. So this is the Titan, right? It uses 90 watts of power. It has similar 50,000 hours of LED lifespan, just like the Fluval. But its lumens, look at the lumens, right? Because like the previous lumens of the Fluval is 3,300. This is 21,000 lumens. Pretty insane, right? That's a lot of light. And then its color temperature is between 9,000 and 12,000 Kelvin. So it's more on the like the cool side, but very strong, very powerful light. If we look at its chart, it actually has like really strong RGB, right? So the red, the green, the blue are these big peaks in their light rather than kind of a smaller curve. And part of that is just because this thing pushes so many lumens that it's just insane. Now here's the scary part. This is on Amazon, by the way. So, you know, the cheapest price you're probably going to get. These things are 500 freaking bucks. And that does not include, mind you, the nicer hanger kit. This means that you have to anchor your the little hanging wires that come with it into your ceiling, or find some other hanging solution. The hanger kit for this, by the way, and like for the Kessel, so like Kessel goosenecks are like $35 per gooseneck. So per light, you're next to that. Or you can get the hard steel that's like a kind of L shape like this. Those are $65, by the way. Oh, and with the Kessel, you also need a controller if you want to control it via Wi-Fi instead of manually controlling it. That's $100 more for the basic controller, not the really nice controller. This thing doesn't have a controller at all. It is literally just on, off. There's no ramp. There's no nothing. But it has crazy power. So, I'm going to put them all head to head. I have downstairs in my fish room right now one UNS Titan. I have two Kessel A160 Tuna Suns, and I will have, you guys know I have Fluval lights, but I'll actually have brand new out of the box Fluval lights, all out of my pocket, because I need to be really clear on something with this. I think that there's a worry that if I were to get any of this sponsored in any way, shape, or form, at least as far as what we're testing, there'd be a concern for bias. And I get that. So, yeah. Obviously, you guys know, like, you know, small YouTube channels like mine do not make the kind of money that affords this. I'm doing this of my own accord because I'm a crazy person. So, thankfully, the Kessels that I picked up and the UNS Titan I got from a friend who'd been using them, and he's changing to this like crazy custom built lighting system because he's like way more out there in crazy town than I am, as far as it comes to like how we like to set up our tanks. So I didn't pay full retail, but it certainly was not cheap to buy this stuff. So let me go over some of the parameters. Mike from the Fish Tank Barn, you've great question that's coming right away. So here's how I'm going to do this. And then once I'm done explaining this, I'll take a couple questions on this if people have it, and then we'll move into like just general Q&A, okay? So Yeah, yeah, gotta love being crazy. I don't know. Sometimes my wallet's not so happy when I'm crazy, but the the tanks for testing are going to be as follows, and I'm still setting some of this up. So I'm trying to see what I can do. I guess you'd say in this part, like I'm trying to determine like what kind of substrate I want to use. I want to determine what kind of filtration I want to use. Those kind of things. I'm still figuring those last little details out, and then it's a matter of picking stuff up. There's going to be 340 breeders, so basically the exact same size as the Plants for Profit tank. And the reason why I'm doing this is I think that the 40 breeder is a common enough tank in the United States and Canada. Sorry for you European folks who get all those really pretty rimless tanks all over the place. Um, I don't want to spend like $200 a tank or $300 a tank to do this on top of the cost of the lighting and substrate and filters and all this kind of stuff. So I'm going Petco dollar per gallon sale, which 40 breeders aren't dollar per gallon; they're like half off, which makes them like I think it's 55 or 60 bucks a piece for a brand new one. That's affordable. I'm certainly not using like UNS tanks or 88 tanks or anything crazy like that. I I spent too much on lights to afford that. let's be honest. So they'll be every tank will be basically exactly the same. So they're going to have the exact same plant load. They'll all have the same CO2. They will all have the same substrate, same tank, same filter. So that the only difference tank to tank is the light being used. We're going to start with one Titan, one Fluval, one Kessel. And I think this is kind of an unfair comparison because we just looked at the stats and like the Titan uses double the wattage of power of the other two lights. It has like double the lumens and it's double the price. It's a little unfair comparison, but I want to see just like a single light how I want to be able to show you guys the difference if we have everything exactly the same in a high-tech setup. And the plants will start as tissue cultures because it's the only way to really guarantee uniformity in plants by like size and rough number. And then the substrate is going to be some kind of aqua soil, probably something like Fluval stratum or probably not Amazonia just because it's too expensive. I'm looking at potentially trying Brightwell's substrate just because I haven't used it yet. And, I've heard a lot of good things about it, and it's really similar to like Fluval stratum and ADA and Tropica. So I want to show that. So here's how the series will go, and it will be a series because it's going to be long term. I want to preface something really important here. For those that maybe don't know, maybe you're new to the channel, I'm by career, my job for a living is I am a software and hardware tester. So for a living, I can, Andrea, I'll take my hat off and you'll see my hair is just like horrible right now. So that's where I'm wearing my hat. I was up a little late and, I didn't really get time to do the hair and makeup this morning. And you can not like the Seahawks all you want. That's fine. I grew up in Seattle. That's my local team. I remember when we sucked in the 80s and 90s and early thousands and mid thousands. So the few years we've been good, it's fun to feel great about that. All right. Anyway, so I lost my train of thought. So to keep everything uniform, I'm trying to get everything the same because I work as a professional tester. So my job is to basically test the limits and break things for a living. So I'm going to take a software and hardware tester's perspective into aquariums. That's how I live a lot of my life in my fish room. But I want to be able to show you guys in some like serious head-to-head testing so that rather than me telling you like, I think this light's the best or this light is so blah, 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 whatever unboxing you hear, we're like, here's how cool this item is. I just want to show you. I want you guys to be able to see once a month, I'll check in and we'll show like a week-to-week progress throughout that month so that you will be able to visibly see the difference. I'm trying to decide whether I'm going to do like a static setup and literally get a picture every day so that you can see like a small pseudo time lapse, or if I want to do like a short video at the end of each week. It's kind of a matter of what I think is the best for my schedule and my timing. And I'll be getting some help to do this. Like, my roommate and my girlfriend are pretty awesome. They're going to help me a little bit here and there for some of the documentation side of things. But the key here is taking like rigorous testing standards from professional hardware and software testing and applying them to this project. So all the lights came out of my pocket. They were not cheap, let me tell you. But I want you guys to be able to see that kind of stuff. And then when it's all said and done, you could see, like, let's say, if in a month it's really obvious that the other two lights can't keep up with the Titan. And I think that's going to be the case because it's just so many lumens. It's so powerful that the color intensity on the plants and things like that will probably be, there'd be a significant difference between the Kessel and the Flugel. Well, I have two Kessels and I have two Flugels. So I can double up the lights and then you get roughly the same wattage and then roughly the same cost. So there's that as kind of a backup. I'm not sure how fast I'll have to do that, but if I get to that point, you'll get to see, basically what I'll do is I'll do a full trim all the plants that have grown in the first month or 2 months or however long that takes. And then we'll update the lighting to get a rough equivalence in cost and then let you see if you're spending the same amount of money roughly, which of those lights gives you what. Or we can stay, and this will be kind of something that'll be up to the community too, of how you want to see this experiment run. If it's just one light and you're only buying one light, how much is that like bang for your buck? So you watch it and kind of like is this that light that only cost me $180 rather than $240 rather than $500? Am I getting enough of what I want visibly to stay with that light and just not worry about the like crazy high end, your George Farmer levels of tech, right? Or you're going real nutso on some of these things, like Green Aqua, where they have these like really insane tanks, and it takes daily maintenance and stuff like that. Because I almost guarantee you with that UNS that like algae is just going to go bat-ass crazy, and I'm not going to clean the glass every day. I want you guys to see these things so that we know what we're dealing with these kind of different variances in our lighting. So with that being said, Mike asked a question. Am I going to use a par or per meter? I will be using a par meter. My club has a par meter, which is very good, and I don't think we have a per meter. So, and those things are not cheap, if I remember right. The last time I looked at par meters are like several $100s a piece, which my club has one, so there's no reason for me to go buy one. They have a pretty good one, and it's kept calibrated often. And then the per, which is a usable radiation versus that, I have to relook. Like if I can get a per meter kind of cheap, sure, I'll grab a per meter and give you a per versus par. But really it's kind of a visible test. Like the first setup day, we'll look at par and things like that. But then after that, we'll just kind of be watching what happens. So that being said, yes, I'm gonna with these setups, I will be using high-tech plants. I will be using CO2. I'll be using the pro version of the CO2 Arts, the one that has expandable manifolds. So it'll be a single regulator running 3 manifolds off of one 20-pound tank. At like, I think I'm going to do 6 bubbles a second into 40 breeders. So it's a pretty good dosage of CO2, which is much higher than I would run in anything else. But because we're going higher light, higher tech to keep up with some of these things, this is about where we need to be. I'll be testing basically before we kind of get everything set up. There's some, like, Dennerley has a CO2 strip which will tell you your parts per million CO2. we'll test those to see that I get to the right level of CO2 in the water, so it's not too much, it's not too little, and things like that. So, that being said, that's the experiment. Once that's all done, however long that goes, and as long as like there's some like risk that in the comments I'm just gonna get like, well, why aren't you testing light X, or did you do Y, or that kind of stuff. To start, super high tech, Sandy. So, and part of it is just because those lights are so powerful that if you don't have CO2, you're just gonna like blow everything out of the water. The plants won't keep up with the algae on like the UNS Titan. So if this goes according to how I think it should go, which is in 3 months it gets a really good, and maybe 4, it might take 4, it gets really good visible things where people can see it and go, okay, that's what I'm getting out of those lights. And we can make some good analysis of that, just seeing it, right? Not me telling you, but you physically seeing what's going on. Then we will tear down all the plants, all the lights, so it's effectively a brand new tank, and then we will go low tech. So that would be, like I'll go buy, I won't need tissue culture plants. I can go buy low tech potted plants, like from the co-op or something like that, with all mostly easy stuff. So things like Pocostamon octopus and like a Ludwigia is a simple red plant, or maybe like tiger lotus or something. Common plants that are easy for pretty much anyone to do. And we'll do 3 low-tech lights. So these are going to be like your budget specials on Amazon. So like the Night Crew, the Beams Work, all that kind of stuff. That's what we're going to be looking at second. So if the first one goes well, because I've already invested quite a bit into it, then we'll move on and we'll start testing other things. So the goal long-term would be that I can apply professional testing standards to kind of any piece of equipment in the hobby, and we could see side by side. So another thing that's in my head to try is like if I had 3 of the exact same canister, like let's say it was the Oase canisters, just because they're kind of new to the US, and there's a lot of kind of a lot of channels that are sponsored by them, a lot of hype around them. So what if we took an Oase canister stock, just the way they come, and then we took a second one and we emptied it and we filled it with just like say the Aquarium Co-op sponge stuff, right? The big foam sponge that you can cut to fit, and nothing but sponge. And then we took a third one and we filled it with some other like third media. Maybe it's Tika Matrix, or you pick your poison. I've actually got one in mind that I want to try. And then we can literally have an empty water column, no plants, and add liquid ammonia and test its actual biocapacity. So we could start at say like a milliliter of ammonia per 10 gallons every certain number of days. I need to do research on how much is appropriate, and then slowly dial it up to see how much biocapacity each of those sets of filter media, using the exact same filter, can handle. Because that could tell us, well, how many fish could we put in a tank if we're using this filter, right? So this is kind of some of the other ideas that are in my head, not just a pure like head-to-head lighting test. Lighting is the most interesting to me because I'm a plant nerd, and I like showing how awesome the Fluval light is, but also seeing what other lights are like. Like I've used Beamsworks, I've used Phoenix. I think Phoenix is horrible, but a lot of things like that. So I want to be able to show people that kind of stuff, and also had to mute my mic for a second. I had a random cough. And also for folks that like don't live in the United States, like I know in Australia, Fluval lights are crazy expensive, and it might almost be cheaper to get yourself a Kessel or something than a Fluval. Well, this will let them see the performance of those lights, and maybe it's like only brand X is available. Maybe I will try to find what is available in Australia, because I know I got a few Australian fans, and head to head them in some way long term. So basically, I want to set up kind of a testing lab, and not like, I don't want to go too crazy. I'm not going to just do nothing but tests on my channel. I want to mix it in. So that's why kind of the goal is like 1 video a month as a check-in, and I'll figure out a documenting process and work from there. So one of the other questions in chat that I want to address from Alyssa is where I'm going to put these things as far as controlling sunlight and stuff like that. I'm currently, with the help of my roommate, making space in my garage, which has no extra light whatsoever, so that basically the only light that is going to be on these tanks is one very small like LED bulb that lights parts of the garage, which most of the time is off, and more importantly, just the aquarium lights. So there won't be any sunlight, direct or indirect. It's going to be only the lights over the top and a kind of controlled environment. So I've been looking at ways to set up kind of like a big curtain around the tanks so that the only thing lighting them is those lights over each tank. So just kind of some variables there to get out of the way so that you understand the, I guess you'd say like test environment as opposed to test procedure. Test procedure is literally just run things, give them the exact same fertilizer, the exact same substrate, exact same plants, all that kind of stuff. And most likely for the first one, I'll start with tissue culture, because also it lets you guys see like how things grow out of tissue culture in the high-tech environment for those who want to start looking into high-tech under each of the lights, and how often you need to trim, like, you know, one of the high-tech required Rotalos versus XYZ plant. I'm not sure what the plants are going to be long-term. I'm going to try, full disclosure here, if I can find someone who will like sponsor the plants or sponsor the filters, that I will try to do, just because if I can cut a little bit of cost out of this so that it's not like I'm not living on ramen for the next like 6 months, I would love to do that. But yeah, so basically the items under test will always be out of my pocket. That way there is no potential bias toward an item that was given to the channel as a purpose of testing, if that makes sense. And I'm sorry, I know that I'm like constantly looking over here. It's because just where my chat is versus like up into the camera, so that I'm looking right at you, but not really. One of those things. And as far as like barriers between the tanks, so here's where this gets interesting. The UNS Titan and the Kessel are both only designed side to side to cover roughly 24 inches of light. So their span side to side is only 24 inches. So if you look at like the UNS Titan specs on their website, to cover a 6-foot tank, they suggest 3 of these freaking lights. So to do a 125, a standard 6-foot tank, you would need $1,500 worth of lights. Or 2 fluvels. So the spillover light is really unlikely because holy Jesus. Well then, hi Sandy, thank you very much. That was totally not necessary. I kind of had this all covered, but wow, thank you very much. And I don't miss. Sorry, I know I'm babbling a lot. And Kreger 024, I know that we diva YouTubers take a little long to load sometimes with the hair and makeup, but thank you very much. Also, like I never ask anybody to do super chats or Patreon or anything like that. I feel like you guys give me your time, and I know I've said this several times, but you guys give me your time, and that's super precious because I barely have time as is for some of the things I want to do, which is to say, like, I would love to do more extensive stuff like this, because at heart, like, for a career, I test things. I've got that kind of brain where I'm super analytical. I love like tinkering and pushing and playing on things when it comes to technology. Hence why, like, Pro Mode came out and I was just like, I get to play. Which I'm in love in Pro Mode. I'm just gonna put that out there. I really do think that Fluval Light, for its cost, because it's not completely prohibitive. I mean, yes, it's a little expensive, especially if you're in Australia. But it's not like UNS Titan or the ONF flat one. And just some reference, I know there's going to be some like high-tech people are going to be like, well, why didn't you try the ADA light? Or why didn't you try the ONF flat one? Or why didn't you try the Twin Star? It's like I don't know if that big sigh is obvious enough, but like, Okay, so the ADA, the ONF Flat One, and the UNS Titan are all basically on par with each other. If you look at their statistics and you look at how they've been used, and you can look at like Green Aqua, because Green Aqua runs all of them across 3 tanks, and or like 4 or 5 tanks. They have a bunch of different lights, and they all basically give you the same performance. So you really kind of only needed to test one. Just like you could test a Fluval and a Phoenix 24/7 SE basically side by side, and they're kind of the same light, except the Fluval's more reliable. And I'm sure there's going to be some Phoenix fanboys that want to fight me on that one. But man, when Phoenix only gives you a 6-month warranty, the company doesn't even believe in those lights. The company doesn't believe in them. Fluval gives you 3 years. UNS 1, Kessel 1. But their usable hours is pretty high. So that's pretty good. Okay, so here's a great thing. Like, here's Mike from the Fish Tank Barn, which Fish Tank Barn, I aspire to turn my garage into something similar to your fish room one day. But for now, I might even show you guys, most of my garage is storage. I'm going to barely have room to itch out the 3 40-gallon breeders that I'm putting in. So just as a reference to answer that, Dank Tanks, 3 40-gallon breeders. They'll all be side by side. And I might build some little like barrier just to be absolutely certain. But I think because of how the lights are designed and how their arc of light happens, as long as I have like a 6-inch gap between each tank, I probably don't need to put them that close. And I could actually probably put them almost side by side perfectly with the distance for the hangers that are being used. Just because their light spread is only so far, so I'm kind of controlling that ahead of time. But there was a relevance in the question of, am I going to put dividers between the tanks? And it's not terribly hard to do that. So it's something I'm looking at. It's kind of one of those things where first we got to put up space, secure all the items used for test, and then kind of like monkey things around in my garage to figure out exactly what we're doing. But so as Mike pointed out, he had a 245, let's be specific, not just a 240, extra 5 gallons. Nice. To light it with the Ecotech Radions would have needed $2,400. Holy. Sometimes I'm curious about some of these lights and why they're as expensive as they are. But yeah, it's nuts. And then, Carrie, thank you very much. I don't know that I'm like as up and coming as I think there are some other people who are really great, but, thank you. I'm happy to teach people what I know and what I can and apply kind of a psychotic level of love for like plants and monkeying with tech to our hobby, because I don't think enough of it's done. I think there's lots of great people who review like, here's item X out of the box, here's, it costs you this, it does the X, Y, and Z, but not enough showing you for a period of time how good it is in comparison to other things, and that's kind of what I want to fix. So we'll start with high tech, then we'll move into, hopefully, as long as everything works as well as I'm hoping it will. If it's a complete disaster, maybe we'll give up on this. But then we move into low tech stuff, so that things that are more probably applicable to most people, like a Beamswork, like a Night Crew. I kind of have to figure. I know like a Beamswork and a Night Crew are probably the 2 of 3 that I'm going to do or Aquaneat. It might be Aquaneat instead of Night Crew, because the Night Crews and Aquaneats are basically the same. And I think Aquaneat is a little more popular. Maybe that's wrong, but it'll be one of those things for the low tech side. I'm actually going to rely on you guys. I'm going to poll everyone, and we're going to take the top 3 lights that are suggested to do like the budget friendly light test on a 40 breeder. So same methodology we're doing with this insane crazy one, and then moving on to the not insanely expensive lights, the stuff that's more commonly used. Like I use a bunch of the cheap Beamswork, the EAF specs downstairs. and I like them. I think they're great lights. I'll probably try the DAs just because they're like the middle ground. They're like the nice cheap light, if that makes sense. you know, um, I will not test a Phoenix Stingray. I'm just going to put this one out there for anybody who might ask. I've had a 4-foot Phoenix Stingray for just over a year, and it's dead. It's dead. It never fell in the water. It's had little splatters of water on it, like from the airstone. And I've had the same thing happen to Beamsworks, which cost half as much as the Phoenix. The Phoenix, it literally doesn't turn on anymore, and those Beamswork are, other than slightly dimmer because they've run for 2 years and not one, they're still running like champs. So I probably have a bias against Phoenix because I think that they make their products terribly. Shots fired. So, with all that being said, now you know the kind of psychosis level of my project, and that's not going to take an aside from like getting Animal House up. That's definitely on my list. I'm kind of trying to. I have to go get a like a saw and a drill because I'm not very handy. So I am the visionary. Just I haven't done the DAs yet, but with my EAs, they've not really ever gotten very hot. I've always been able to touch them. My fluvels are warmer to the touch. Now, granted, the heat sinks for the fluvels are on the top of the light, so it's pushing all the heat up anyway. But my fluvels are warmer to the touch than my Beamswork, but I haven't tried the DAF specs, so the ones that have basically double the light. I've only tried the EAF specs. So we'll look at those things. But yeah, as far as BYZ 513 or 513, depending on how you prefer. Any suggestions for a warm color Rotala that doesn't require CO2? I would just look at what they call Rotala indica. It's a rotundifolia, but it's not actually true indica. So you'll find like Rotala rotundifolia indica. It normally is a green when it's low, but as it gets toward the top of your lights, it's going to get this nice kind of yellowish tone. It's kind of a dusky yellow, if that makes sense, where it's not bright, but it's got this nice kind of mustardy tone to it. I personally like that. You're probably not going to get any of the red Rotalas without CO2. Just most Rotalas without CO2 tend to stay in the green tones. That's just the way they are. They really do require CO2 to get reds out of them. If you wanted something that requires kind of limited CO2, like you might get some orange at the very top, you could look at Rotala Atra, because it's a pretty simple plant. It doesn't actually need CO2 to grow, but to get the like really deep orange colors that you can get out of it, it does want a little bit of CO2. That being said, like I run basically 3 bubbles every 2 seconds into my 40 breeder, and I get perfect color out of my Rotala. It's not like super red like you could if you're running a UNS Titan and crazy CO2, but it's got a nice, really orange color on all the leaves in the upper half of the plant, and then the lower half is green just because it's only getting so much light as it gets shaded out. But that's kind of to answer your question. That's what we're looking at. So there's going to be, I'm sure that I'm going to get a million questions on like, why don't you test X, right? So I'm going to let you guys in through the community tab kind of control the second run of this experiment. So once we get past all the high-tech lights, when it comes to like budget-friendly lights, I'm going to put a list of stuff out there. And it might be one of those things where like we have a couple of different polls to like narrow down some candidates, because it's the way YouTube doesn't let me do like in polls, it doesn't do like a 1, 2, 3 rating system. It's just you pick one. So and I might have to do some other poll of some form to do that correctly, and in some other like outside website. But because there's things like the Costco shop light, which is an LED, the like $12 floodlights on Amazon. Like there's a million different things that we can try, but the thing is, how long do we want to test them for? So if we only wanted to test them side by side for a month, yeah, you could do like the $12 floodlight versus the Costco $40 shop light versus the, pick your cheapest LED out there that's a true aquarium light, so to speak. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff, right? That all being said, it kind of depends on how much time you guys want to see this and if it's if it's even interesting enough for folks. So yeah, and I mean the comment section is probably going to go nuts on me. I'm ready for like the people who are going to be like, well, how come you're not using this par meter that has better detection for red light? Or are you sure that thing's calibrated? You're not hanging all of the lights at the exact same height, so it's not a fair comparison. Come on, man. It's one of those things where like the Fluval is designed to sit basically on top of the tank. Although I've found better success with a small riser, raising it up just a little bit, personally. So like I found, oh, by the way, I think I found, I have to test, I'm waiting for it to come in the mail. I think I have found a really good riser for the Fluval lights that also fits a lot of different lights for those who have been looking for a riser to pull their light a little bit off the top of the tank. If it works as well as I think it should, just looking at it, I will totally let you guys know about that. And it's not something I like make any money off of or sponsored. I just I have found it, and I'm kind of excited because I actually like using those risers for certain lights. Like I don't think the beams work needs them. They do really good at their current height, but like the Fluvals actually really benefit from like an extra like 3 or so inches of height off of a tank. Which I think is about as high as my current ones are on my Plants for Profit tank, which you will see, spoiler alert, that's next week's Tank of the Week, is the Plants for Profit tank after the big swap meet that I went to, so that it's like mostly trimmed completely down and it's not a complete jungle mess anymore. But yeah, so there's a lot of things that we can do long term. It's just a matter of how much you guys enjoy it, because you might find that like this level of in-depth testing is boring. It might not be as interesting as I think it is to someone like me who's like a total tech nerd, and I love seeing like side-by-side comparisons and just kind of going like, how good is that thing if I'm going to spend my money on it? Or do I maybe watching like, maybe watching the Kessel side by side with the like Fluval or the UNS, I'll open my eyes to how wonderful Kessel is. I think if they had more features, I'd probably actually really like them as a light. They're so cute. They're so dainty. Did you notice that picture? I don't know if you guys saw that on my... for the few of you who are on Patreon, it'll come out on Instagram this week. But like the Fluval Tunnel Sun, like literally just fits in the palm of my hand. It's so cute and tiny. I thought they were bigger. I thought they were like, this, and it turns out they're like the size of a Coke can, which is very amusing to me. Okay, this is an interesting one. So, from Crazies, I'm trying to find cheap, usable LED strips. You haven't found any LED strings you're happy with, bright enough to do in bulk, designing a basement fish room, not trying to break the bank. So, you might have to shoot me an email on this, because I don't want to like go into a rat hole of looking them up right now. But there is some pretty cheap LEDs you can use as long as you have a good reflector on the back that will bounce the light around. There's a couple different options. Like I know, was it King of DIY that did one where it was like wrapping rope lights around a kind of a dowel and putting it inside a reflector in some of his old content, I think like 3 years ago, or maybe it was 2 years ago. One of the larger channels did it as a DIY light, and it actually produced some pretty decent light for lighting like a bare bottom tank, but not the kind of stuff that's going to reliably grow plants. That being said, if you want, there are cheap DIY solutions. You can build a pretty good DIY light if you are willing to put in the work. I just don't have the time to do it, like with a controller and all that kind of stuff. That will give you kind of similar performance to like a like the Fluval 3.0 for like $60, like $70. But you don't have like all the water sealing. You don't have the controllable ramp up, ramp down. You can eventually put in a microcontroller to do things like that, but then that increases your cost from that $60 range closer to, in parts and time, more than the same or more than the Fluval light would be in the first place. So I had a long conversation with somebody had some comments about like testing out DIY lights, and I know like UG Aquatics, for example, is currently building his own DIY like really nice light, and might be sending some of those to me to test when he gets them built and to the point that he likes them. So yeah, there are like, you can buy strips at Home Depot. There's a specific type of strip I have in mind that's pretty user friendly. I just have to, I'll look it up. If you shoot me an email, it's bentley.pasco@gmail.com. Just let me know, like, hey, I'm the person from the stream that was asking about strip lights. I'll just shoot you a link to the one I'm thinking about. I just don't want to like sit and navigate through Amazon and try to refine them right now, but I'll happily do so later today for you. Oh, and there's a good example. Alyssa just saying that has tried the rope light around a dowel and reflector thing, and it got too hot and started burning themselves out after a year. Sometimes, like, I know that we want to do things on a budget, but sometimes spending those extra few bucks once is worth it because of the duration and quality that we get long term. Like, yeah, man, a Beams Work light is cheap, but it does dim after a year. And if you ever drop it in the tank, it's toast. It's just toast. So there's a lot of stuff like that. Yeah, thank you, Candy. You're the best. But yeah, just shoot me an email and I'll send you the reflective lights I'm thinking of. They're a sticky back strip that is really easy to work with. That some YouTubers use as like a cheap lighting solution. I've actually been looking at it. They'll take like a cake pan and turn it into a light for lighting themselves. It's kind of funny, but they're a pretty cheap use light that has actually reasonable power. If you're doing like 10 gallons in bare bottom, this might be a really good one. But getting toward like, you know, like 20 talls or 29s or anything like that, or like 40 breeders, you might not be able to get enough serviceable light out of that kind of setup, or at least one that will last you long enough. Put it that way. All right, so we're past all this craziness. Let's just do general QA. Let's just chat. Let's have some fun. What do you got for me? I'm surprised nobody. I know I kind of like I sprung this live stream much shorter notice than usual. Just a couple things happened in my schedule around a medical appointment that got pushed up on a Saturday, as strange as that might sound, but an evaluation type appointment. So it got in earlier so that I didn't have to wait an extra month. And that just meant that like we live stream today as opposed to having the normal Saturday video and doing the live stream next week. That being said, in next week's video, I finally sat down with Cousin Henry. We've done Petco Part 2. That's what was supposed to be out today, but is now next Saturday. So I really hope you guys enjoy that one. It's a little different, but good. Some fun stuff. Just listening to Henry talk about his experiences working at Petco way back in the day, which you guys seem to really like the last one. So hopefully you enjoy this one. It was a real hoot to just like finally sit down with my cousin and babble. Late in the night, we were filming at like midnight, 11:45, something like that. I mean, we were filming really late at night because we both got home late from work that day. And yeah, it was like we had to get it done. We just had to get it done because we were looking at our mutual schedules, and otherwise it was going to be like 2 months before our schedules would actually align to where we could do something again. So we just stayed up late and shot it downstairs in my living room at like midnight. It's one of those crazy things. But so we'll open this to all questions. We don't have to do stuff about the crazy test setup. Just know that it's coming. I will say this: I was testing minorly testing just to make sure that I knew how bright that light was with like the UNS Titan, and testing it, my roommate almost blinded himself looking at it. He was trying to shade it with some white cloth, because it's a trick you can do with certain LED lights. You'll put a couple layers of white cloth over them, and then you can actually like at an angle see each of the LEDs without blinding yourself, so that you can make sure you don't have a dead LED somewhere. Like we did that with the Kessels, for example. You can't do that with the Titan. It's way too strong. It's just way too strong. Sharpies, models, and aquatics. Man after my own heart. Would mirroring the back and sides of a tank work to increase light levels via reflectivity? Purely for plants, it would probably send fish to alley. I've never tested that. In theory, if you were to white out the sides of a tank as opposed to purely reflect it, it should bounce more light around, right? Because white is going to reflect all light as opposed to absorb like black will. So, in theory, you could white or like get some of the kind of stick-on mirror reflection kind of stuff to bounce more light around. I don't know how effective it's actually going to do that because our lights are coming top down. You're going to lose a lot of light from the plants in the first place, especially if they're growing really well. So how much light is there coming down that's going to reflect around? But I think that either like using white or using something reflective should give you a little bit extra and at least keep like your lower growth a little healthier. Just one of those things. It's not going to be a perfect solution as opposed to like just like surrounding your glass box with lights. But, if you're looking to just add a little bit more down there, yeah, I would say start by trying white. Cause you could get like, if you don't want to paint, you could get stick on, they have those like, it just adheres with water, like glass. And instead of getting like something misty, you just get solid white and that'll reflect a bunch of light around. And if you cover, two sides and your back, that should reflect a bit more extra light. Or just paint it. I mean, paint's cheap. Paint's pretty cheap. Like the 40 breeders that I'm going to set up, I'm going to paint them. And I'm seriously debating painting 3 sides as opposed to just the back, so that it's only the front glass and the top where we have, visible areas. But it depends. We might want side shots of tanks or something like that. So we'll see. We'll see how stuff gets rolling when I actually can have like tanks coming in and can start setting things up. Well, so like, let me answer that just because you're right away. Yeah, your wall behind the tank is, but it's enough of a distance away from the tank and from the glass as opposed to putting it directly on the glass that you aren't going to reflect as much light directly into the tank. Whereas if you paint or put something on directly on the glass, the light's not traveling as far. So because it comes out of water, it loses some through diffraction, it loses some of its intensity. Then it's going to go out and hit that wall, bounce back, it loses intensity off the bounce. Then it comes back in through your glass, loses more, comes into the water, loses more, as opposed to hits the white immediately through the glass and comes right back. Like, just the loss of usable light radiation is in the theory higher. So just something to keep in mind. Also, because it's not directly on the tank, it could go to the wall, bounce, and not even come back to the tank, depending on how the light rays are bouncing around. Like if you have a textured wall, for example, right? Crazy things. Geekalotl, welcome. You're new. I recognize you from Corey's video, which it's kind of crazy. I will say this for like anybody that's watching later. If you're still watching after the first basically hour of me babbling at a sciencey level of tech nerd about how I'm going to test stupid aquarium lights. Thank you. It was really awesome having Corey over, and there's a lot of new folks, so cool. Hopefully I can keep you entertained. If not, well, I'm sorry. I'm only so good at things. But, so kind of I would say, like, if you're willing to try it, you could try something actually truly reflective. Like, you could even try taping just, like, aluminum foil up, right? I know it's, like, the most ghetto way to do that as opposed to something properly reflective, but it could work, But, I would go, like, the easiest thing is paint it white. Kind of stuff like that. That being said, you could cause a lot of algae doing these things, too. So be prepared for extra algae than you usually have because there's extra light staying around inside on the glass. Be ready for all those fun things. Any other questions? Wants to talk plants, rainbow fish, guppies, shell dwellers, shrimp, maybe some shrimp, a giant iguana that you found in a ditch. Never forgive me. I'm working on only a little sleep. I spent a lot of time like all these dumb charts. Like I'll just put them back up, like 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 this chart and this one. Like going through and like chopping those to make them usable and setting them up, and then having the tech issues on my stupid microphone this morning. Ooh. All clad chrome with a gloss black behind it. Interesting. Raising shrimp. I don't really eat shrimp all that often. Plus, those shrimp are too tiny. They're so small. I have a little bit of yellow neocaridina. You can see I just want to take a second. You notice all the rainbows are up top right now. They're not playing at all down in the crypts. That's because they're begging for food. Because I turned their light on, then it was 3 minutes to stream. I was like, oh yeah, I'll just feed you later. Also, I've been feeding them later in the day, kind of on purpose, just to see if I can encourage visible breeding behavior out of those fish. But there's only one girl and 5 boys. It's a little rough. So I really like the blue shrimp. They breed slower than cherries, but I'm also keeping them cool water, so they're gonna breed much slower naturally anyway. And I spent a lot of time cleaning my shrimp tank last weekend so that I can film it, and then in doing so I kicked up a ton of random sediment into the water and had to wait for it to clear out so it wasn't cloudy. So I didn't get to film it last weekend. I'll be filming it hopefully today, maybe tomorrow. But yeah, should be fun. Okay, from Sean, can I keep shrimp? I tested my GH and KH. GH is at 5, KH is at 3. So my question would be, with your GH and KH, what is your pH? And then what kind of shrimp are you looking to keep? If you're looking to keep neocaradinas, they're super flexible, like red cherry shrimp. Yeah, you should be fine. Just make sure that you have continuous calcium sources for them, both in their food and in the water column, because you don't want the water to acidify at all and potentially eat some of their carapace away. And you want to make sure that they have calcium in their diet, so that when they molt and make new carapace and all that kind of stuff, that they're doing plenty of good things. So make sure that Shrimp King food, or there's a million different things. I love those little banquet blocks from Zoo Med that have extra calcium in it that are designed for the shrimp. Those are great. Yeah, 7.2, you're fine. Just do neocaradinas. Your GH might actually be, or your KH rather, might actually be too high for crystal shrimp. It depends. Crystals are super finicky. I personally haven't done crystals yet, but I've done blues, reds, and yellows in neos, and they're all pretty flexible. They're pretty simple, especially the cherries and the blues. They kind of take to anything. Our water out here is basically RO water out of the tap, so I have to remineralize it for shrimp. And sometimes I'll just throw a Wonder Shell in and be fine. I love those stupid things. I know Corey does too. He had his walking around all the goldfish and all that kind of stuff before his trip to Peru. That video that came out yesterday, even though he was just back from Peru yesterday. Yeah, you too. But he was talking about how much he loves Wonder Shells other than their packaging, and I'm on the same boat. I love those stupid things. I use them all the time. Every time I go up to co-op, I buy more just so that I have them. Yeah, cuttlefish is great. Extra calcium, whatever. There's lots of options. You can put crushed coral in or oyster shell. Cuttlefish bone is good because they'll actually go over there and they'll pick at it and they'll get little bits of calcium in their diet. Just make sure you have a little in the water every so often. Don't rely purely on the TDS in your tap or the GH or KH. Make sure there's specifically calcium in the water and in their diet, and you'll be fine. Shrimp are really flexible, especially neocaradinas. If you just want to do cherry shrimp, those things can take a huge range of both temperatures and water conditions, as long as it's not so acidic that their carapace starts getting eaten away, because then the babies don't survive. Just make sure that you have a nicely seasoned tank, which is to say it's been up and running for a while, so there's good biofilm everywhere, because a majority of what they feed on, other than if we give them prepared foods, is biofilm, not necessarily algae. But if you do have you'll look at my shrimp tank and I keep my walls with lots of dust algae, so they just have grazing surfaces. Perfect for shrimp. And then, I mean, there's tons of other options you can do too when it comes to shrimp. But yeah, the neos are super flexible. Just avoid like the green jades and the yellows. The yellows breed really, really slow and can be a little more finicky. The green jades are even worse, and the green jades don't breed true. So yeah, candy's in every stream. Don't you know that? Like, just if a fish stream appears, Candy just knows. She is like the one in the Matrix. She just knows that it's there and appears. It's like some kind of superpower. It's a really niche superpower, but she's got it. Carrie has cherries. Just ordered blue velvet super blues. Man, enough number. That's enough references to blue that I almost have to go look at them. I don't know that I've looked at those. I have just like the blue dreams that are from Lucas's line, and they're super pretty. They're super dark blue, and I love them. They're beautiful. Don't mind me. I can feel my nose. Well, I think part of the problem with the green shrimps, to answer that, Dank Tanks, is that people know they don't breed true, and when they don't breed true, it's less enticing to people who want to like start a shrimp colony, right? Because you have to like really hardcore cull them, and that's not fun. Like, even in my blue dream colony, I have to cull 3 or 4 shrimp every like 30, and like I'm chasing little clear shrimp around, and it's not fun. It's not fun chasing shrimp. And then moving them over to some other tank so that they can like clean rainbow eggs in the future or something like that. Just to... It's not fun. You want to just kind of like fire and forget, which you can do with cherry shrimp. They just breed and stay great. You almost like cherry shrimp are so well bred at this point that you almost never get like culls out of a red cherry colony, where like all the other colors you do, or they breed like the yellow neocaradinas are like, oh, has it been 6 months? I guess we can give you a couple babies. There you go. There's like 5. Just keep waiting. Like they breed so slow. But I like the way they look, so I have a small group of them. Although one crawled out, little jerk. Out of the shallow tank, found his way out. And then fell off the side of the glass into the not watery part in the middle of the night, and found him the next morning. So now I only have 11 instead of 12. But hopefully, one of my females was buried, so hopefully I'll have little babies soon. If they do well. They might not survive. Yellows are so finicky. It's a pain. Any worries about inbreeding with cherry shrimp? Not really. I mean, so if you look at like most non-primate species, you have to be really specific about this. It takes something like 400 generations in fish and shrimp for inbreeding to get to a point of where you have serious genetic defects. Now, are you going to have the occasional, like, in a fish, bent spine, or in a shrimp, improper color? Yeah, of course. Of course. But how often they do that is not that often, right? So, whoa, Sharpies, your cherries are crazy. You get all the things. You get Bloody Marys out of cherries? That seems crazy. Because Bloody Mary's, right, it's the pigment of the actual flesh that's red as opposed to the carapace. So they're usually like kind of not necessarily different species, but very different line where that's not happening, but that's pretty cool. Sandy, do I have any MTS in my tanks? So obviously we mean Malaysian trumpet snails. I actually have like kind of a baby farm of Malaysian trumpet snails. So the tank where Bob's rainbows are produces a ludicrous amount of baby Malaysian trumpet snails. And my roommate and I will literally pull out like handfuls of them and then just go pick a tank and put them in. So as long as it has like a reasonably deep substrate and has plants in it, or even no plants. So like the little 29 gallon that the zebra plecos used to be in, that now has some of the growing up rainbows. There's a bunch of Malaysian trumpet snails in that thing to help keep that sand clean. And literally like a handful of babies just blump, let them go. It's just one of those things where like, yeah, I have, once you have Malaysian trumpet snails in one tank, you can effectively have them in every tank if you really want to and you wait long enough. And they hit kind of a critical mass where they'll make lots and lots of babies as long as you're making sure there's food sources for them. And then, which if you're like me and you let your mulm stay in your substrate because it's constant fertilizer and it's food for all the Malaysian trumpet snails you like to keep, you'll have plenty. I think the only tanks I don't have Malaysian trumpet snails in are this one behind me and the other tank that's over there. So the two tanks in my bedrooms don't have Malaysian trumpet snails. Every other tank does. Many of them only have a few, to be clear. So there's that. But like as I get more and more in, okay, that's not true. The shrimp tanks also don't have Malaysian trumpet snails because I don't want them competing with the shrimp for food. But all the fish-based tanks, they all got Malaysian trumpet snails in them, basically put. And if they don't now, they will soon. Because I keep getting plenty out of that tank with Bob's Rainbows, and I move them around. Hello, Charlie. Welcome. Welcome, my friend. Oh, what did I miss? Do cherry shrimp go well with fish? Okay. So, I know this is getting answered in chat, but I want to add my own specifications here. Any fish that can fit a shrimp in its mouth will eat shrimp. That being said, they might not eat the adults, but they will predate on any babies they can find because the babies are so small that they're just a scrumptious snack. So one of the ways that you can keep a healthy shrimp colony in with, especially nanofish like your like neon tetras and stuff like that, don't try to keep shrimp with rainbows. Just don't. The rainbows will sit and pick at them. So even if they're not big enough, like even if the mouth of the rainbow isn't big enough to fit them, the rainbows will pick them apart. So don't do that. Even Amanos, I have watched rainbows pick on full-size adult Amanos, and I didn't think they would. And then I got proven wrong as like this giant female Amano was just getting picked apart by a very large rambunctious Bozeman boy in a tank. And it's like, okay. So, that being said, like, if you have good hides that the fish can't get in, like piles of very small rock, I have sometimes used, like, bags of ceramic rings that I'll just throw in tanks for babies to hide in. And, like, sometimes you just have, like, big balls of moss around stuff, or like, the small cholla wood where it's got lots of little space inside where the shrimp can hide. You have lots of hides like that. You can do shrimp with fish. The shrimp just have to have places to hide and successfully raise their young and make sure that food is getting to their young to where they get to adult size, where they get too big for like most of your standard nanofish mouths. That being said, are you going to keep like if you just want to keep like Cories and Autosynclus, yeah, you could probably breed shrimp, no problem. Most guppies, like they're really kind of top eaters, so they don't pay too much attention to shrimp. That being said, like platies will decimate a shrimp colony. Mollies will decimate a shrimp colony. Where like endlers, no, not really. They're going to leave the shrimp alone. I've had endlers and shrimp together and had no issues with them. So just keep it in mind, like have plenty of spaces for the baby shrimp to hide because those are at the biggest risk. Your adults can live, but if they're not producing babies, shrimp have a very short lifespan, especially in warm tanks. If you're at like 76 or higher temperature, your shrimp are only going to live 1 to 2 years. But that one shrimp is going to get to adult size in a couple months. And then if it's a female, it's going to have, 30 to 50 babies every like 28 days or whatever it is. So your colony just grows by nature as long as you keep it healthy, give them lots of hides and plenty of food. So there's my answer to can I have shrimp with fish? If larger fish, just don't expect them to live. Plecos, don't expect them to live. Like bristlenose, you're probably fine because they're big algae eaters and not much of a carnivore. But if they can snack on a baby shrimp, they'll snack on a baby shrimp. They just most of the time are so reclusive and hide away, and if you're giving them things like zucchini and things like that, they don't need to. But yeah, like don't try to keep shrimp and rainbow fish. They're gonna tear those poor souls apart. But yeah, so I want to actually answer a little bit of what Mr. Joseph is saying here. JH Aquatics, MTSs ruin layered substrate. Yeah, so if you're doing like a dirted substrate with a sand or like gravel cap, yeah, they're bad in those. Like I do mixed substrates of aqua soils anyway, so it's all mixed in like a slurry, if you will, as opposed to like the lasagna theory of putting together your substrate. So, I don't care about Malaysian trumpet snails. I put them all over the place because it helps keep, it helps prevent pockets of nasty stuff or potentially like septic things occurring in your substrate in a tank if you're doing things the way I do them. So, I love Malaysian trumpet snails, and eventually, when I stop losing my self-control to like not buy him a boo puffer, I will need like millions of snails. So, or more accurately, when Preston John like finally forces Scoot and Fruity puffers into my home, which is probably going to happen soon. Soon in big quotation marks. Like, I have to have a proper tank for them. But I know people are like, you're going to set up 340 breeders, puffers. So let me answer that one. This is one thing I didn't mention, and I'll mention now. In the grand experiment, no fish. Unless it is autosynkless, and only autosynkless. And let me explain why. I don't want a variable to be, did I accidentally feed more food in this tank than that tank, even though the same number of fish are in there? Because, you're just taking a pinch of food out, right? It could be slightly more, which could throw your phosphate in one way or the other. Yes, this is like the level of crazy testing standards I'm going to. So the only fish that will possibly be in those tanks during testing with plants is some autosynkless, just because I only have to have light to produce biofilm, and autosynkless can happily live off only biofilm. So if you're wondering, like, what pretty fish are going in the science experiment tanks? None. Just none. Maybe some autos. Not even shrimp. I know, it's so boring. It's so boring. I know. Not even snails. My goal is no snails either. So that might change because I might accidentally get a snail in there. But my hope is that initially, because I'm doing tissue cultures at first, I shouldn't have any snails. But long term, when we get to like the low tech plants, we might end up with snails that come in off of potted plants. That I can't really prevent. But going from tissue culture to low tech is kind of rough, as opposed to like taking a high tech plant tank with tissue culture. And I love autos. Don't get me wrong. I have autos in almost every tank I own. I love autosynkless, and I like having them just to have them. But keeping like biofilm layers fresh in tanks and having them in there like slowly skimming off of them is pretty healthy for a tank environment. But it's one of those things where you want to make sure that there's no variable whatsoever. Thank you, Joseph. You're the best, man. But it's one of those things where I want to make sure that I have minimal variance other than the light. So, like, I will very likely be using Easy Green and Easy Iron because it's a pump head. So that every time I press, I know that I have the exact same dose of liquid. And one could argue, well, like, why don't I do EI dosing and get exact, like, millimeter levels of, or milliliters of ferts and stuff. Like, I could do that. I do have, a friend of mine gave me a bunch of brand new Greenleaf Aquariums, EI dosing, like all the powders and stuff. So I have like a ton of that stuff downstairs. But also if it's just the same, the same mixture, nice and simple, it makes it easy. Right? So no muss, no fuss. Kent's Fish. Geek, I actually went really in depth about the experiment at the start of the stream. So do me a favor and rewatch. If not, like, I will have a video that goes like the exact variables on what the experiment is. I just don't want to like repeat it and burn people out, right? However, if you want to, shoot me an email, I'll tell you. So Kent's Fish, looking for red plants, 150 gallon. It is planted with Eco Complete and ADA. It's a good combo. I like it quite a lot. I have it in my big rainbow tank. Having time keeping the reds down in the substrate. Interesting. How thick is your substrate layer? That'd be my first question. So if you're looking at like stems, say like Ludwigias or something like that, I mean, really just bury them almost as deep as you can, so like barely just a little bit is coming out of the top. My favorite plant, honestly, like low tech, low ease, even though they can go in high tech setups, that gives you red, is red tiger lotus. You've seen it in my community tank on Corey's channel. I love red tiger lotus. It's as long as you're given good iron, you're going to get a nice deep scarlet red out of them. instead of like the kind of mottled yellowish red and more green tones if you're not getting enough iron in your system. And they're a fire and forget plant. You just plant them down in the substrate and they're not going anywhere typically. You can bury them pretty deep. About 2 inches. So your substrate layer might actually be too thin in the case of like reliably holding down some plants if they don't have a good root structure yet. The way that you can get around that, and this is a planting technique. I gotta look for a second to see if I've got something to give myself a demo here. I need like I have an unopened straw here randomly. Please stop sliding at me. Okay, thank you. Random paperwork. My desk is a mess, so that's why I never show you it. So like, let's say this is my stem plant, right? This terrible straw. If you, with your pincets, right? If you grab down here, push it into the substrate, tilt, and slide. And then all your substrate's going to fill in behind you. Then try to just pull your tweezers out this way and let it sit at an angle. It'll correct itself naturally and go toward the light. That's a way to kind of help anchor fresh stems into a thinner substrate. So I hope that makes sense, right? You're gonna push it in, and then with your pincets down at the bottom, you're gonna just slide one direction or the other, and you're just gonna do every plant in that direction. So like, let's say you're planting left hand side of the tank, you're gonna slide it in and push this way, right? Which it's kind of opposite there, so sorry, but you get the point. Like, you're gonna push toward the glass wall, and then you're gonna pull rather than pulling your pincers up, pull your pincers out to the side. That way, the little bits of substrate will fall in behind and kind of lock it in, and then you can push kind of around it at the top layer to fill in where you've kind of dug that trench from sliding it. And you can just push a little bit of substrate over the top. That's a technique that I use when I'm struggling to get certain plants down. It tends to work really, really well for me, so hopefully it'll work well for you. Sleeper aquatics. How many autos would you do in a 20 high? So, okay, here's the interesting part. That would depend on what all else is in the tank and how many plants are in the tank. If it's really densely planted, like if it's the level of plants like this tank here, because this is 15 gallons, so kind of similar, and it's just crypts, I would look at 3-4 autosynclists. They love being in bigger groups, but the big problem is you don't want to have so many of them that they're now starving themselves out because there's too many eating all the biofilm. Unless you're like actively supplementing your tank with Bacter AE to create a bunch of extra biofilm like you would for shrimp, which that Bacter AE is something you can use to feed autosynclists, just as a heads up. Or maybe you regularly feed things like zucchini, right? So that you're giving, similar to how you would feed plecos, you could feed autosynclists that way. An example would be like my zebra autos. I put zucchini in them for them pretty regularly, and they chow that stuff down. They love it. As long as I'm not standing in front of the tank, because they refuse to go anywhere near a visible portion of the tank if I'm near it. Trying to get photos and video of those fish is such a nightmare for me, and I hate it because they're so pretty. Like, they're such cool fish, but like seeing them is a nightmare. And they like having a piece of wood to hide with, and they will like minorly chow on the biofilm and stuff that comes off the wood. So for their health, I have it in there, and then I don't ever get to see them. Where like regular autocyclists just don't care. They're like, oh, I'm on a plant. It's got nummy stuff on it. I'm just gonna sit here. Oh yeah, you're the human. Whatever. Just leave me alone. So silly. But if you were to do if you wanted to do just autocyclists, I'm looking for the day where somebody goes like, here's my 20-gallon autocyclist tank, which would be amazing. I would love to see someone do that. You could easily do like 10 or 15 of them. You would just need to regularly use something like Bacter AE to get sure there's plenty of biofilm, or like zucchini or something, like some kind of food supplement that is good for them. Little algae wafer tabs are not good enough. But Sarah has, it's like a veggie treat, basically, that's like the version of an ODIP tab, but it's all vegetable and a little bit of spirulina that you can I drop them in for my zebra autos. I give them like one a day, and they devour that stuff. And if I needed to do it in most of my other tanks, because most of my tanks have between like 3 and 5 autos, except for the 2 big ones have like
I think it's 9 autos each. I don't use a lot because I want to make sure there's always lots of stuff for them to feed on. And if I ever do like a short up of my autos, they have these like big old chubby bellies that like they clearly are getting plenty to eat. So it's just kind of a thing that I would look at. Maybe the experiment tanks will just be auto sinkless tanks. So yeah, that's kind of my opinion on that. Code 1635. Do you notice large difference in offspring survival if you leave them in a tank with their pleco parents? So you're talking about like pleco babies surviving with their parents. So I, full disclosure, do not have a ton of pleco breeding experience. Working on that. I want to breed some plecos. There's a couple lines I wanted to. I wanted to breed zebra plecos, but I'm a dummy and killed mine. Most of the plecos I keep, I don't keep them to breed, although I am looking at getting some super reds from my good buddy Corvus Oskin, Joel, who's just a sweet dude and has a ton, and he's going to let me have a few for fun. Ken's Fish, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. I'm always kind of happy to give people info. It's kind of my jam is passing knowledge on, because I think the better that we all get, the better the hobby gets in the long run. As opposed to like, no, it's my information, I'm going to hoard it to myself, I'm the secret master of X. That doesn't work in like the real world. It shouldn't ever work in hobbies. You'll find most of the best people in the world freely share their information, and I love that thought process when it comes to hobbies, where like, guys like let's pick Greg Sage, Gary Lang. Like, just pick your like superpower in any given realm, and those people like are always doing talks. They're always happy to talk with fish nerds and give advice. Like Gary Lang, for example, he's super active on Facebook in the right groups. It's really funny. Like, I will see posts from Gary because I'm in some not so super secret groups for rainbow fish that are out there on Facebook, and he's super active in those things when he's not like crazy busy at work, because he works as a scientist for a living, so every once in a while he's neck deep in science, man. Or like when he's going out to Papua or Australia or something to do rainbow work, right, where he's not even in the country. But pretty crazy. My friend Dance Fish, what's up, buddy? So anyway, to get back to that, I think it depends on the pleco. I think with some of the more aggressive pleco species, so some of your kind of carnivorous, like your hypensistrus and stuff like that, I think your survival rate goes down when you leave them with the parents, unless you just happen to have two, like a one father and the female is pulled out, and that male is a really good parent, because you will get that. I've seen some of like this very successful hypensistrus breeders for like leopard frog plecos and zebra plecos, where they'll leave the father in, they leave the babies with him, because those particular fathers are so good at fostering their babies. They've gotten so good at it that they do better with the parent than they do being put in a tumbler and on their own. I think with new parents that you're more likely to have higher survival rates taking care of the eggs yourself and not relying on the parents, where with bristlenose, like, they have a million bajillion babies at a time, and they're pretty good at taking, like, male bristlenose are really good at taking care of them. So, I would say, like, if you're doing a bristlenose of any given shape or form, like, the long-fin green dragons or super reds or just generic albinos or claro precos or something like that, any of the stuff that's like kind of falls into that category, like the bristlenose do, they're pretty good parents. That being said, I am not a very good pleco breeder, so what do I know? I would ask Eric Bodrock. It's a pretty good one if you can get in touch with him. Dan of Dan's Fish knows a ton about all sorts of fish. He's a great resource. Alyssa Bentley, the other member of Team Bentley. One would argue the true member, because it's her last name, not her first name. Like mine is, where mine's is a first name. Mine's arbitrary Team Bentley, not true Team Bentley. These are all people who do quite a lot of pleco stuff. Probably better than me, but I would say in general it depends on the species. L201. That's a green phantom. I'm not as amazing with the pleco numbers unless I own them as you might think. I have to look this up. Snowball. Oh, the Orinoco angel. Oh, it's such a pretty pretty pleco, but also kind of a pain in the butt. Any advice for them? I mean, feed them well and give them lots of places to hide. I don't have any personal experience with the L201, so me giving advice on them is kind of like just spitballing and doing the generic internet thing of like, well, if you do XYZ, that's what the internet says is right. I can't give you any relevant advice because I personally haven't kept them. The person I would look to on those, trying to think, you could look at people like, I don't know if Pleco Barbie has done them, but she's done a lot of Plecos, so relevant advice. Jeremy Bosch, who owns, it's like Amazon Aquatics or something like that, but he's a really good Pleco breeder. And catfish in general, like he's done lots of whiptail cats and does all sorts of talks all over the place. Eric Bodrock, I mentioned earlier from All Oddball Aquatics, he's another really good resource if you can get to talk to him. He's not as active on the internet as some of the other people out there. You might also look up Dr. Eric Lucas. He does a lot of Corydora experiments for science, but he also keeps a lot of plecos. So he's a big catfish person in general. So that might be a person to actually look up. And he does, if I remember, or no, it's not Eric Lucas. Eric Lucas is a shrimp guy. There's two guys with Lucas as the last name. One sec, let me look it up for you. I want to look because he's come to speak at my club and he's fantastic. He's super enjoyable. I just want to look up who. I want to get your name correct because I'm saying Eric Lucas and I know that's wrong. Oh, it's Eric Thomas. There's Eric Lucas and Eric Thomas. Eric Lucas is Biped Shrimp, who's a shrimp like ultimate master. Dude is really cool to talk to. He's really knowledgeable. And then there's Dr. Eric Thomas, who's done all sorts of cool things with Corydoras, but also keeps a lot of plecos and a lot of smaller plecos. So he might be actually a really good resource if you can find him. And he does do some stuff on YouTube. Well, let me find his channel for you. 1 minute. I gotta hunt a little bit, but I know that he has one, and I want to find it. I have to spell his name right, though. Of course, you're going to show me some other person that's... I'll find it later, and I'll post it in a comment on this. So just look for that, okay? But he does some stuff on YouTube as well. He's really cool. He knows a ton of stuff about Corydora neurotoxins. That's what his talk was at our club. It was actually really interesting to enjoy. Caleb, what's up, buddy? Good to see you. Just peeking in to say hi. I appreciate it, man. But yeah, it's something like bristle noses are far more likely to just like be really good parents. Like the Hypensis, you're kind of like, oh yeah, Mile High Plecos is like, it's in his name. Plecos is his jam. Let's be honest here. That's another good person to probably ask Pleco questions. Wow, the English is flying way downhill real fast. And yeah, and a lot of times bristle noses will just keep breeding after a certain period of time, and in theory the babies can interrupt each other. So after a certain period of time, it is good to separate your babies just to make sure they get good food and they don't bully the next generation of babies. But bristle noses in general are really good parents, whereas like your Hypensis and some of your meat eater carnivores, not so good parents. I think the wood eating plecos in general tend to be okay parents too. Like, don't quote me because again, I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. But from what I recall in watching and talking to some of my pleco friends, they're similar to bristlenose in that they're pretty good parents. So hopefully that answers the pleco question more in depth than probably needed to be for a guy who doesn't actively breed plecos. Oh man, don't mind me. I'm only a little tired. Okay, Dan's Fish. This is a great question. What are the smallest available rainbows besides thread fins and blue eyes? More on the lines of Melanitania and Glossolepis species. So there are several really good dwarf rainbow species that are not pseudomagills or the thread fins, because the thread fins are not a pseudomagill. So you have the Praecox rainbow, which is one of the smallest. So those are the ones that we typically call like the dwarf neon pleco. You have these amazing guys behind me, which these are the Melandas. Now, granted, they're crazy rare, but they're this big. You know, they're like a 2-inch fish, 2.5-inch fish. They stay small, very, very small. There is actually a species of bozemanii that comes from the Kromsa. I think it's a stream, might be technically a river, that only get 3 inches. So that's kind of interesting. You get a bozemanii that stays small. There is the Melanitania that I have downstairs called the Iwer, which they're an unnamed species. That's just their catch location. They are basically like a Goldii Decai that only gets 3 inches. Kamaka rainbows stay small. They get a little bit bigger than a dwarf neon, which is to say the Praecox or some of the other ones. My actual favorite... Did I say dwarf neon pleco? Wow, I'm sorry, dwarf neon rainbow. Wow. That's what happens when we talk about plecos and then go straight into rainbows. My brain just doesn't function. Actually, one of my favorite dwarf plecos is the McCullochai. So they're, depending on catch location, they have slightly different color, but basically they're a silver body with black stripes. And then most of them have orange or red fins, but there is a species that has yellow fins, which is Skull Creek. And those are getting more common in the hobby. So you actually can find those kind of regularly. Most of them will have like an orangey red. I had some for a while. Very, very pretty fish. But all of mine were fosters from a friend, and he'd had them for like 3 years. The big thing to keep in mind is that most of the dwarf rainbows don't live as long as the bigger boys. You use your words. Thank you, Pam. I'll try. So like your big Bozemanii and all the like Glossolepis and all that stuff, you know, most of them are going to live like at least 7 years if you take good care of them, and can live like 10, 12, and even 15 in some cases. I think Gary Lang at one point had a Bozemanii that was like 13 years old or something like that. I mean, he was an old boy. But the smaller rainbows only typically live like 3 to 5 years. So keep that in mind. Those dwarf species don't live quite as long, but they'll spawn every day if they're happy. So you have a lot of opportunity to breed them. Just make sure that you're getting the eggs out of the tank, because they'll just eat their eggs. They're not the smartest in the world. But yeah, so any of the McCullochai are going to stay pretty small. So that's a great dwarf rainbow to look in for. Say if you're a fish shipping business out of Wyoming that does some of the most amazing packaging I've ever seen. Shout out to Dan's Fish. Not sponsored at all. I just ordered fish from him, and they came in the most immaculate shape I've ever seen a shipped fish. So got to give the guy some love. No. McCullochais are great in 40 breeders. Praecox rainbows are great. If you can get, Kamakas will even do well because they really don't get that big. The males get kind of tall on the body, but they still only get to 3 to 3.5 inches. So a small group is fine. Okay, so this is a great one. So from Sharpies, is there a tipping point to trigger breeding in pseudomcgills? Currently have 2 males and 3 female furcatas, which I love furcata rainbows. They're actually, of all the pseudomcgills, they're probably my favorite with the little fork tail. I know most people like the red neon or the thread fin. I just love the bright yellow fork tail that those guys have. They're wonderful. So one moment, let me make sure my nose doesn't drip. I'm having a minor summer cold thing go on that has gone on forever. I know that's really attractive there, but so usually to get any rainbow in general, especially pseudomcgills, to spawn, they need to know that there's lots of food available for baby fish. It kind of, even though they're horrible parents, it triggers something it's like a subconscious kind of thing where if there's lots of small microfood in the water, aka start feeding live baby brine shrimp or frozen baby brine shrimp pretty regularly, and that will trigger them to spawn far more often. Especially that high protein content. Rainbows, despite being an omnivore, are actually rely very heavily on a higher protein diet. They eat a lot of insects and microcrustaceans out in the wild, depending on where their location is. Some of the ones in Australia see more of the microcrustaceans, where there's a lot more insects, and the ones in Indonesia, not Indonesia, but Papua New Guinea and specifically Papua, where the more of the the Melanitanias and stuff are from. They see very high insect rates.
Most of the pseudomagills are like Australian, just as a heads up. There are some that are from the area between Papua and Australia. So like the Aru Island, for example, is a big one, right? There's really high amounts of insects there for those fish to eat, and insect larvae, like mosquito, like how we'd have mosquito larvae here in the United States, right? That you can cultivate. Giving them those kind of live foods drastically increases the rate in which they're going to spawn. So if you're continuously feeding like live baby brine or cyclops or daphnia with all those like microcrustaceans and stuff in the water, it triggers something in their brains to know like there's lots of food for babies. Let's make babies. Let's make lots of babies. And freeze dried is good, just Sharpies as a heads up, but typically frozen is better because it more simulates if they were sitting in the water column naturally. Live is the best because they actually have to hunt them down, and then they know there's lots of live food here. That's good for babies. But not everybody can keep doing like live food cultures. I totally understand that. You might look at vinegar eels. I have a video on it. But no, vinegar eels, because they stay up in the water column and they're a pretty easy microfood to feed, are really good for pseudomagills. They just don't have the same nutritional content as like a baby brine shrimp or daphnia or something like that. So that's my advice. You could also water change more. So if you're doing like say 150% a week, do 2. That high quality like recyclate rate of water and slightly more flow does tend to make those rainbows a lot happier, and when they're happy they make babies. That's just kind of how rainbow fish are. They're not the smartest kids in the block, but they are very pretty, and they do respond very well to water changes and good food. Dan kept 60 fricatas in a Bear 30 breeder with a matin filter and a large spawning mop. 50% water change daily, tons of food, got hundreds of eggs daily. That is not hyperbole. Even though I stressed it to make it like it was. And I believe it because Dan is a master. But I would argue Dan is better than I am. I just got them radio pipes. I love fricatas, man. I think the fricatas, and it is with an A, it's not a US, don't worry. You were right. It's not for fricatas, it's for kata. Leave it to the rainbow guy to be a jerk. But yeah. No, seriously. I think that if you can provide them like a good live food source and you give them a lot of water changes, they'll spawn like crazy for you. Because almost every rainbow, the only case where that would not be the same, and technically it is anyway, is if you had a rainbow like the Cyanodorsalis, where, you know, it's a little, oh yeah, you're metered in the UK. That's rough. Start collecting rainwater. I know in some places it's illegal, but the other thing you could look at doing is, instead of doing one large water change, it's a lot easier in the United States because it's pretty easy for several of us, Dan, several of us to water change like crazy. Like I'm in Washington, we get tons of rainfall and we got lots of glacier water out here. Our water's dirt cheap, so I'm kind of lucky in that case. But I would look at try doing multiple small water changes in a week that are the same amount of water overall, and that continuous kind of new water coming in trigger might help you out with just a little bit more reliable egg production out of your fish. What cats do for martial arts. Oh, I love puns, but oh boy. That would only be, a kata is only in Japanese martial arts, because kata is Japanese. In Taekwondo, it's actually different. And for us poor Americans who don't understand Korean, they just call them patterns instead of the actual Korean term. I took Taekwondo for years, by the way, just as a random heads up. I actually did like 4 different martial arts. Geekalotl, what rainbows are newbie friendly? New to rainbows, not too hobby. So, all of them? Honestly, rainbows are really hardy fish. The only caveat to that is they do very well in a planted tank. Most of them need lots of room, so if you can't get like a 4-foot long tank for some of the bigger rainbows, stick to the dwarf species like praecox or McCullochi. I actually like McCullochi more than praecox personally because they're a little less common. And their color pattern's a little more interesting to me, because I like stripes a lot in fish. So like I love zebra danios. I love zebra plecos. Are we noticing pattern? Like, I like color change and I like stripes. You give me color changing stripes, my I don't know. My life will end. I will not know what to do. But more seriously, like those are two of like the easiest entry level rainbows, and they're smaller. So if you're only doing like something like a 40 breeder or even a 29, those are actually good options for those tanks. If you want to do, if you're going to do a bigger tank, like maybe you want to do a 125 or something, like a big 6 foot tank, like Australian rainbows are super simple and they're super cheap. And those are typically going to be the Australis when you get them, the Western rainbow fish. They're all really pretty. They have a lot of like mixture, kind of a rainbow pattern, almost oil slicky to them when they get good light. But yeah, they're really neat. Well, I would argue the 80s design fish are when you go buy glowfish because they're all dyed like bright. Well, they're not dyed, but you know what I mean. They're bright neon colors, and 80s was all about neon. I know. I'm a child of the 80s. And every once in a while, we find some old 80s stuff around some of my mom's stuff that she's kept because she's like, she holds on to a lot of things. She's very, like, never, kind of doesn't want to let go of stuff sometimes that are good memories. We'll find some bright neon stuff from the 80s every once in a while from when I was a kid. It's like, oh boy. I wore that nonsense. Ooh. But yeah, so it depends on tank size. I would say if you want to start easy, start with Australian rainbow fish if you're going big. If you want something smaller, say like a 40 breeder, I would look at McCulloch's or the Pracox rainbow. If you can find them, Kamaka rainbows, because Kamakas are gorgeous little fish. They are really, really hardy. Basically, all you need is like at least about 120 TDS. You want their water slightly hard. You don't want to have like the rainwater that comes out of the tap here in Seattle. So you just crush coral or whatever you want to buffer with. Wonder Shell is also really good. And then just water changes. Like if you can give them 50% once a week and you give them a nice planted tank, rainbows are super happy. They eat pretty much anything. Although if you can give them slightly higher protein, it is better for them because they tend to have a more protein-rich environment in the wild. Hope that helps. From a person who's a psycho about rainbows, because I love those fish, and one day I will have a Gary Lang level fish room. One day, whenever I can get all of the stuff that's in storage in my garage gone. All rainbows suitable for a 20 high, heavily planted with shrimp, no heater. I got bad news for you. That answer is this many. So here's the thing. Rainbows come from warm environments naturally. Some rainbows will do fine in like the 70, because like if your room degree is like 75, then your temp is probably sitting at like 72 in the tank. Just because you can, like I can keep my warm room at like 83 degrees, and most of my water is typically between 78 and 80, depending on how high the tank is in the room. Because heat rises, all that kind of stuff. But rainbows like warmer water. Typically at 76 degrees is actually where you want to be, and you need to be you don't want to dip them under that too often. They come from environments that are consistently hot is really what it comes down to for the big ones, even the pseudomcgills. And then two, like if you're doing small shrimp, they're going to eat the shrimp. They just will. Rainbows will pick at shrimp, even baby. I've had baby rainbows that are only like an inch and a half, and they have picked amanos apart. And the amanos are bigger than they are, and they'll slowly pick at them because they're very curious. They will eat pretty much anything, and they eat lots of microcrustaceans in the wild. So seeing things like that don't bother them. They'll just keep picking at them until they get them into a small enough size to where it's easy for them to eat. So there's that. If rainbows are 70s disco fish, rams are 80s punk, new romantics, what's the 90s grunge fish? I mean, wouldn't you say that like the 90s grunge fish is probably like an aggressive cichlid? Where like I would say new wave is or no, grunge is probably like a pistos, right? Like I know rams are a little more punky, but like I would argue that maybe the pistos are, because a lot of times they just have that like colored mohawk, and the body's kind of a little bland. Or like male crebensis, because male crebensis don't have a lot of color except in their fins, and then they're always like kind of machoing up. Like I would argue that the grunge is probably a pisto, especially older male pistos when their mouth gets all huge and they're just like, just all angry all the time. That kind of fits the grunge movement. Otherwise, maybe it's plecos because like literally grunge. They love living in grungy tanks. So maybe it's just plecos. Maybe deep down, grunge is pleco world. maybe that's why plecos are so popular with people in my generation. Is we loved grunge. We grew up on it, like especially we nutcases from Seattle, who it's like that is where that movement of music came from. The Tiger Oscar. Whew. My roommate used to keep Oscars and loves Oscars. I would rather keep a Jack Dempsey than an Oscar, and I've stopped keeping aggressive cichlids for a reason. Although I will say Oscars are more playful. Like you can pet Oscars and blood parrots, and they'll like happily play with your hand and stuff and not be a jerk. Where like a Dempsey will just try to bite you because they're jerks. Anyway, but yeah, I don't know. That would be really fun. I think that would be a fun video for someone to do, especially if they're really much better at editing than I am. It would be to do like the what fish fits the era based on like music style. So like like disco versus this, or like what would be your country western fish, like your Johnny Cash kind of fish versus your like new age like rock pop country, hair metal versus grunge versus like old hard rock where you're looking at like not Metallica because Metallica is metal, right? Or like Black Sabbath or anything like that, but like your I guess technically like your like Tom Petty and stuff like that, where it's like hard rock but not technically metal. That would be a very interesting video for someone who was both a like super psycho music person, which I'm one of those people. I just love kind of all music and am really into it, or someone who's way better at editing than I am, like Jimmy level editing from a complete music nut who really knows all their fish. That could be like a really fun kind of like the fish wrap video that Jadron Aquatics did, right? It'd just be a fun video, just be fun and entertaining. So Puckamus Maximus, which what a great name, by the way. As somebody who plays MMOs a lot, with granted a lot is for a long period of time, not necessarily a lot of time. I don't get that much time anymore. We always refer to pugs as pickup groups. So that kind of, if that's where your name comes from, fantastic. If not, well, you just learned something random and stupid. What is the best way to support me? Just watch. I mean, I seriously don't ask that anybody do things like Patreon. Like I do have a Patreon, but it's kind of just there. It's not something that I don't do a lot of exclusive content on Patreon. Purposely, I want my content to be free. I don't want anyone to ever feel like they would have to pay to get extra content out of me. Like, granted, I did give some spoilers for like some of my Patreon people, but those same things are going to come out on my Instagram next week. It was just like showing that like the Kessel and the UNS lights are at my house already. Like, I'm deadly serious about my crazy experiment because I've shelled out a chunk of money already. But Candy. Not supposed to do that. It's supposed to be hidden in the description section all the time. But yeah, so I really like time and like the shares and likes and comments, like all those things that like hit the YouTube algorithm. Like I know the people who watch YouTube are probably as sick as hearing that garbage as I am, but those are the things that actually help a channel the most, especially when you're trying to grow, right? And trying to get your message out there, whether that message is education or your message is being an idiot like Jake Paul. Sorry, I'm an old bitter man. What do you want from me? But it's one of those things where like it really, that sharing is what actually helps the most. Granted, like, yeah, financial help is great. Don't get me wrong. It's appreciated, but I don't ever want anyone to feel like that's the support that matters. Naturally, I don't do YouTube with the intent of like, this is my career. I'm not that disillusioned. Like I'm an analytics kind of person. Like I work in the tech industry, in the tech sector, and I do all sorts of data reporting all the time. Like I can look at my YouTube analytics and like when I get an example, like when I get 100 comments on one of the Fluval videos, I feel really good because that's that level of interaction is like really high compared to my standard video. And like as my audience grows, yeah, that'll be more common. But that kind of thing, those spikes, like there's this great little Facebook group for a lot of the YouTubers who are trying to make it to like say the 1,000 subscribers. And like I want to be clear, anyone who says they don't do YouTube for money is lying to you. I am doing it partially for money, but really it's I make about enough to pay for my fish food every month. That's really all it comes down to. But just more like if somebody's trying to get to that level and they're saying, I'm not doing it for money. That's not true. The goal is to get it so that you're monetized, right? Because then you can afford to look at doing better things. Like I think my channel is making like $30 a month when I bought my new camera, and my new camera and all of its kit cost me like $1,600. You know, there's no way that my channel was going to make that back. But it was kind of one of those things where it's like, am I serious about making things better to do what my goal is, which my goal is to educate. My goal is to show people, to give people my kind of knowledge, and spread it, because I don't think that I don't feel like there's enough people teaching good lessons on YouTube. There's lots of look at this new fish I bought, or look at how much money I spent on XYZ, which I'm saying that as I talk about how I spent a ton of money on lights. So I guess I'm kind of a hypocrite, right? But you know what I mean? It's one of those things where my goal is not to live off of YouTube. Would that be lovely? Yeah, because then I'd be my own boss and I could do more content than I can now because my career takes up a lot of time. But that's not my goal. My goal is simple. I want to be able to take what knowledge I have and what I learn and get it to as many people as possible. Because the better we overall, as aquarists, are, the better it is for this hobby. The more likely we are to see this hobby grow, so that younger generations. Because you know what? There's not a lot of young kids into fish. You look at a great example would be Fancy Tail Aquatics and one, I'm trying to remember who else went, but they went to the ALA convention this year, and there was almost nobody there, and it was mostly old guys. It's it's like a lot of those people who are out there, Gary Lang can't live forever, so there has to be new rainbow fish people coming in that are going to take up those mantles and be those experts and do that level of research and spread that kind of knowledge, whether it's through talks like Gary Lang does, going out into the wild and catching fish, or whether it's talking faces like me who are just going to be here and want to try and preach how awesome rainbow fish are, or teach people how to keep better care of their rainbow fish, or how to breed rainbow fish, or how to do plants, how to do shellies, how to keep Jack Dempsey's, whatever your jam is, right? And Sandy Cheeks, you have said exactly what I think. I think the hobby needs better tech. And yeah, there is kind of gatekeeping in the aquarium hobby where people will know something and they will try to gate it behind a book or some kind of paid whatever, because they're trying to monetize it. You give me your time. Time is more valuable than anything else in this world, because if you weren't watching me, what could you be doing? Anything you freaking wanted to. And that might be watching some other YouTuber. That might be your jam. That's how you feel good. And I watch a lot of YouTube, mostly just in my ear while I'm working so that I can listen to stuff. But it's one of those things where time is so valuable to me as somebody who works 50 and 60 hours a week and spends 2 to 3 hours in traffic every day on top of that. Time is incredibly valuable to me. So the fact that people give me their time, that's all I am ever going to ask for. If people do more, that's great. There's things like Patreon. There's all sorts of stuff like that. And really, I would much rather just say if you have one friend who does fish, who has hasn't tried plants or is struggling with plants, show them my Plants for Profit series. Done. That's the best way to help me. Money doesn't matter. I mean, it matters, but it's more I would rather spread that message more, because then over time, as long as I keep providing a good value to people, which is to say information that I don't ask money for,
inherently over time I'll get more advertising through YouTube, and it'll financially help me do the things that I'm trying to do, like super ambitious, stupid, sciencey level experiments where I put things side by side that cost way too much freaking money, and show you what they're really doing for that much money, right? That's what that lets me do. So, best way to help, share. That's it. You've given me your time. That's all I could ever ask for. I don't ever ask for more. Candy links something that she's not supposed to link. How dare you, Candy? But thank you at the same time. So, with all that said, there's a couple other questions I'd like to get to instead of going into my own like philosophical diatribe about yeah, and you know, the like button, and like really like it's crazy in the YouTube realm, like how important even dislikes can be. And likes, like I have a serial couple of dislikers, and I sometimes argue to myself, Dan, you're the best. But like I sometimes refer to them casually as my best fans because they take the time on every single video to go in and dislike it. So at least they're showing up. Maybe they tank metrics for watch time and stuff like that, but whatever, I don't care. That part doesn't matter so much. They're two people out of hundreds of you who are extremely generous with your time. And like I get like 98% like ratios. That's insanely good as far as the YouTube metrics are concerned. And comments matter a lot. Like all the likes, it's so funny how much to YouTube, you could like joining and super chats really doesn't matter. Although when you're like Corey's level, the membership he has for the size of his channel and in our hobby is really incredible. I don't know those actual metrics. He's talked to me when we were in person about some of his conversations with YouTube and not the actual metrics, because he's not going to share that stuff with me. That's not my business. But it's really interesting how some of those things matter for our hobby, because like pets is kind of niche as is. There's a lot of bad actors in pets, sadly. But for those of us who mean well, right? We mean the best. Really, like comments, likes, and just watching the videos, that's all that I could ever ask for, because that matters more long-term to the, like, I guess channel health would be the way to put that, as opposed to like the short-term and how to like, what's going to be the best financial support. Short-term is not what matters. Long-term is what matters. So we're done talking YouTube dum-dum. All right, let's answer questions. It's more fun. Yeah, so as Dan said, I'm not doing it for money. By the way, check out my website. No, I don't have one, but I do have a Get Gill store, but I think I have nothing for sale right now because I've just not had time to ship anything. There was somebody who asked way earlier. I remember this, and I didn't answer, so my bad. I do ship plants because it's a little easier to ship plants than shipping fish, because those can sit in my car until lunch hour, and then I can go, and they don't have as strict a time window getting through the mail. That being said, I have almost no available plants right now because I took almost everything I had to the swap meet. In which, if you didn't watch that video, the how to make 300 or more in a day doing plants, please watch that, because I'm really legit about that. It's not a clickbait or anything like that. Like, you can easily make $300 or more. I've made up to, if you don't include stuff I bought, right? Because I bought some things for myself while I was at that one. I've made 500 in a day doing a swap meet. So I'm quite serious. You can do it. You can do it really easily. Just take the same methodology I'm doing. If you have like a swap meet or something like that, like the GCCA swap, if you go to that area, you can easily make a good chunk of cash as long as you prep for it and you take the right approach. So let's do some fishy questions, because they're way more fun than babbling about YouTube metrics and dumb stuff like that. So we mentioned, like, I think the hobby needs more tech in it. Like, I agree with you, Sandy, and I think I need to do like a more, that'll come as I do those testing videos. I'll explain some of my methodologies and the way my brain works, and that'll make some sense. Yeah, oh man, Aqua Balls, you have a really great statement here. I can't talk about a fish if I don't keep it for at least a year. If I get new fish, that means I don't know anything about it. So I'm kind of on that page, except I do a lot of my research before I ever get stuff. So I will spend typically anywhere between 2 and 3 months researching from a lot of different sources if I'm going to branch out to something new before I ever look at purchasing it. And a lot of times I will try to, if I'm really trying to get something like that, I'm going to source it through the best source I possibly can. somebody like Dan's Fish, for example, who does a really good job of sourcing fish. Thankfully, my local fish store, the Aquarium Co-op, really freaking good at sourcing their fish, especially if I'm trying to get specific things. Like when I was trying to get the Kochu tetras, it took Corey, I think, all said and done, I think it took 9 months. It was 6 months of really actively looking for that fish, but it took like 9 months of me waffling back and forth a little bit on them and kind of like poking him until I was finally like, hey, no, seriously, find these fish for me. And then it was like 6 months of the seriously find these fish for me that it took to find them. And in that period of time, I had all that time to research. So I spent all that time figuring out where they live, what they do, because those are typically a wild caught fish, and how to keep them. So take your time, be patient, man. I cannot tell you how important patience is in this hobby. Like being impatient, putting your fish in a tank too early, not cycling it long enough. It's just inviting disaster, and it always feels horrible. It's like when you make a mistake and kill lots of really expensive plecos. You feel miserable for months on end, and you beat yourself up for a year. Which I should. But I am the visionary. I'm going to get to actual questions now and not me going off the rails here. We're already at 10 o'clock. Wow, I'm just going to keep rolling. How can I trim crypt growing out of the tank? Wow, really? It's a huge mother. It's split into 3. Do I uproot the excess? Just trim straight across the trimming a hedge? So you can trim the top of crypt leaves. You could also trim the tallest leaves off. Like I would love to know how big this tank is and which species of crypt. Are we looking at like Balancea or Spiralis, one of the longer, strandier kind of crypts? Are you talking like Wendetii coming out of a 10? I'd love to know a little more details. If you can, I am the visionary. If I don't get to you in the end of the stream, if maybe you don't have time or something, maybe you're mobile, shoot me an email. That's bentley.pasco@gmail.com. I'd be happy to, if you can shoot me a picture so I can see it, I'd be happy to work back and forth with you and help you with some really in-depth back and forth where we can ask questions and kind of monitor for over a period of time to make sure that plant, one, stays really healthy, but also isn't going completely out of your tank. There's lots of great comments about my diatribe as far as like, they're very passionate people who feel like there's only one way to do stuff. And that's true. You get that too. William Jensen was eating candy and watching a Lego movie too. Fantastic. The Lego movies are great. I'm an adult, but I love kiddie flicks, and those are some of the best because the humor in them is fantastic. Whoa. This thing bounces away from what I'm trying to read. Oh, yeah. Sharpie's is talking about the fish police. I laugh at fish police, too. I basically ignore them at all times because anybody who preaches that there's only one way to keep them, something has obviously never met Lucas Bretz, and because he basically breaks like every rule. And most of the knowledge base that people go off of is from fish keepers in the 60s. So things have changed. Things have changed, guys. And we really need to look at those things. Oh, Crypt Hooteroy. Yeah. That one will grow very tall over time. So my concern now is, what light are you using? Because I've noticed under very bright light, my Hooteroy stays shorter. Under lower light, it grows taller. Because it's reaching for light the entire time. So yeah, that would be kind of my next question. Just shoot that to me, and if all else fails, again, shoot me an email. Let's talk back and forth. I'd be happy to walk kind of step by step through you in email. I'm pretty good at answering email relatively fast. I've had a lot lately in the last few days about people wanting to buy guppies. Who would have thunk? It was like 40,000 people saw guppies that hadn't seen them before. So I've had an inundation on my Facebook, my Instagram, and YouTube comments and emails. I was ready for it, but I wasn't ready for it at the same time. Geekalotl. So what are some good ways to keep mosses fluffy and reduce algae off of them? Physidins especially. So I can say this. Physidins loves flow. Moss in general loves flow. It needs to be kind of like well anchored. Now, other things is if you have good algae eaters, like you have really good shrimp colonies, or maybe SAEs, even like Florida flagfish that will sit there. Something that's going to kind of preen through that moss constantly, searching for food, will keep it clean and kind of fluffed up. Flow does a really good job. So, like, I'm going to teach you guys a secret. of how I make moss look freaking amazing when I decide to grow it. Let me get this empty mason jar. Actually, no, fish food tin. Perfect. Fish food tin. Let us assume that this Tetracolor tin, which does not have Tetracolor in it, is a sponge filter. Wrap your moss on your sponge filter. Or, more importantly, attach moss at the top of your sponge filter and don't use the lift tube. Why? Let me explain. The airflow that's moving your water has just a gentle enough flow that it's not going to throw the moss all over the place. But all the debris, especially if you put it on the top, is going to get sucked into the sponge. You're going to have that good, clean water that's got a lot less debris in it moving over the top. And that water flow is going to kind of keep fluffing your moss up like this, right? Kind of like how a jellyfish moves. And that's actually going to push debris off into the water column and keep it very clean. That's my secret on moss. You could also do this with like moss ledges and just have that way there. If you have like a ledge and it's pretty well anchored somewhere, and then you could take like a power head. It doesn't even have to be at a high amount, and have that power head run directly across all your moss, so that it has just a light flow of water over the top the entire time. That's going to keep a lot of that debris off, and it's going to prevent algae buildup. Can I just mention that this rainbow is going nuts in the background? So that's kind of like my trick. When I'm growing moss in one of my tanks, I have one tank where I'll specifically grow big mats of moss every once in a while, and then I take them down to the co-op and sell them because they always need moss. I put it on a sponge filter. I literally just wrap it along the top of a sponge filter, let it adhere, or I will push it against the back glass and get it to adhere to the glass. If you do it long enough, you can get this to happen. And one day I might show you guys how I've done this stuff. So it keeps the moss super clean, and you can make Java moss look like Christmas moss. I've taken Java moss into the co-op before, and they asked me, "Is this Christmas moss?" And I laughed and said, "No, it's Java moss." Some of the employees, like Caitlin, for example, and Nick at the co-op, were like, "I've never seen Java moss look this good." I was like, "Oh, I've got a secret." Now you have my secret. There you go. You're welcome. Here's the secret. Flow. That's it. Seriously, like gentle flow, especially the kind of stuff you get out of a sponge filter, is perfect for keeping moss clean. It's just all about placement. The next victim, code 1635. My stargrass is blocking out some light to lower leaves. When I trim the chop and replant it, will the bottom fill back out again? Yeah, it should. Stargrass is one of those things where it is technically a stem plant. You treat it like a stem plant, except that you can more aggressively trim stargrass and it will stay low and bushy pretty well. So it's a good thing. Just if you really kind of, excuse me, bit of a hiccup there, or a burp or something, I'm not sure. If you kind of regularly trim your stargrass, it's going to keep the bottom good. It's also kind of light hungry as a plant in general. So if you're kind of only getting it, if it's getting shaded in any way, shape, or form, or maybe it's a pretty tall tank, like 24-inch tall, like a bigger, like a 90-gallon or something like that, and then it's, say like a Beamswork light where you're going to get like medium light toward the middle and top and kind of low light at the bottom. It might need just a touch more light, but that's typically, yeah, if you just kind of aggressively trim it and you only keep it, yay tall, like an inch to 2 inches tall, you should keep really good, healthy, low growth. And it might just be that what you want to do is trim your tops, and it admittedly is a lot of labor, but if you pull out all your old growth and replant your new growth and then take that process from there on out, it'll keep your low growth really nice and healthy and great looking on stargrass. Those are tips actually directly from Joel, because I asked, Joel's like been doing stargrass for a really long time, and his stargrass always looks amazing. So I was just like, hey man, what's your tip? What would you do? I'm going to put it here in a shallow tank, so it's not really going to have the opportunity to grow tall, but if I put it into a big tank, what would I do? And that was his advice. So okay, so yeah, that's what happens when you show Luke's guppies off in a co-op video. Yeah, I know. We'd been trying to do that for months, but it was really fun to have Corey and Jimmy over. I always love hanging out with Jimmy. It was my last chance to see him before he left, and yeah, Corey's just a hoot. We talked for like 3 hours off camera, but it's technically recorded somewhere where
Clearly all we did was bash every other YouTuber. No, we were babbling. Like, we talked about the Zis filter for a while. He asked me how I felt about like the Zis Airstones. We talked about, well, we went really in depth talking about like that little thing that we talked about, like the tidal filter, for example. We talked even more in depth about the tidal and some of my opinions on it afterward, and some like random experiments I'm going to be trying with titles in the future, versus like say an aqua clear. So yeah, I mean, there is a crazy level of audio that will never hit the internet because it's just going to get chopped and thrown away from us being mic'd up and talking. And we went back in while Jimmy was shooting B-roll in one room, and it was right before we were done, right when they needed to head out, and Jimmy was like finishing B-roll on the guppy tank, and Corey was like, "Oh, by the way, we've had mics on the whole time, so you're gonna have like 4 hours of audio to sift through. Have fun." And Jim was just like, "Man." And yet Jamie worked magic and had it edited like pretty fast in the grand scheme of things. So it's just co-op. They do so much content that they're ahead quite a bit. Like I think 3 weeks or something like that is how far ahead they are between shooting and something actually, like when it finishes its edit and getting released, is something like 3 weeks or something like that, just because of the the amount of content they do. That's kind of how they have to do it. Crazy stuff. Pokemus, would that work with Sawasser Tang? So it should. Sawasser Tang is slightly more floaty than moss tends to be. Like as moss gets dense, it gets heavier, so it lays down a lot better in that airflow. Whereas Sawasser Tang likes to just kind of float away. But what I would do is I would get Sawasser Tang on a piece of like wood, really well attached, or you could do like a coconut husk if you've got the holes in it, or some of like the mesh domes. You pick your choice of how you want to attach it. That's going to work really well, so that the Sawasser Tang's nicely anchored, and then you could put that near a sponge filter. So like I would have like a dome of Sawasser Tang with a sponge filter behind it, and that way the water flow is moving through, and it's going to pick up that debris as that water flow moves past it, and all that debris is going to go into the sponge and get picked up. But you could also do that same kind of tactic with moss. I've just had better success putting the moss actually on the sponge filter itself. But yeah, it should work fairly similar. It's just Sawasser Tang is slightly more floaty, so just be aware of that and try to compensate for it. Geekalotl, does Bacopa caroliniana split into two stems when trimmed like many stem plants? So here's the thing. Yes, but also no. Depends on how the Bacopa is doing. Sometimes it will split into multiple stems. Sometimes it will only throw one side stem, but then lower on the stem you'll get lots of little side stems, which is really common in Rotalas and Ludwigias. It also is very common in Bacopa. So very healthy Bacopa, if you have a stem up here, you're actually going to have like baby stems all the way down that thing, typically, when it's really healthy. So if you let, like, on a 40 breeder, for example, if you let your Bacopa go to the top and start to flop over as it grows, you're going to have, like, every inch or so, a new baby stem, potentially two, to break off and plant. Bacopa propagates from direct trimming a lot slower than some of the other things like Rotalas, Pokestamons, and all that stuff, but it throws a lot more side shoots, and we'll throw them all the way down at the bottom substrate as well. So you will have like one here, and it will throw several small ones at the bottom, and up the main stem, you'll have even more child stems. And if you let those get to like 2 inches or so, you can break them off and plant them and start propagating your Bacopa that way. And that happens with basically every Bacopa species, whether it's Caroliniana, Colorata, any of the harder Bacopas, they all do the same thing. So there you go. Heads up. We have a question from Charlie to Dan. I'll ignore that one. That's for Dan. And yeah, flow on a 6-foot planted aquarium. Lights on, turn, CO2, lights up. All right. Yeah, I mean, you can probably grow some really good moss. I actually don't typically grow a lot of moss, although in the future I might set up tubs similar to what Corey has and use them for growing moss. And in that moss, keep rainbow fish so that they will spawn in all the moss, because it's a really good natural spawning mod. Sharpies, models and aquatics. We're probably going to get it close to like my last couple of questions here, just because I do have some other stuff I'm supposed to do today, and I want to spend a little bit of time with my lady before I have to do those things. So, a bit out of your wheelhouse, but do you know if you can trim the rhizome on a water lily? Don't really want to
bin it, but it's got way too big for my little pond. So you're talking about like depends on I guess it depends on which water lily. I haven't done like pond plants specifically. So if it's you should be able to divide the root structure down. I think. I would ask some pond people more specifically. Like, you got a good pond supplier out there. Like Pond Guru might actually be a really good question for that, just because you are in the UK. That might be a good person to ask that question and get a better answer than I can give you, because I don't mess around with ponds very much, mostly because I don't have the time to tear up my backyard and make a pond, even though I'd kind of like to. Do I have a video breaking down the function of each light color in the Fluval 3.0? I can't find any resources about the function of red, blue, white. Only that blue produces a lot of algae. So I'll break that down really fast. I don't have a specific video on it, although you could do a kind of a slightly more scientific video on light in general and how colored light affects plants. And if there's enough demand long term for that, maybe we'll break that down and explain it. It'd be kind of a plants for profit type thing, but. Rhizome is the diameter of your bicep. Holy, wow, that's quite big. Yeah, I would ask Pond Guru on that. So, and let me answer that for Geekalotl. So, in light, right? We're always taught in school like the Roy G. Biv, which is not technically accurate anymore, but whatever. It's your color spectrum of light, and within that spectrum, we typically push certain colors of light because those are what penetrate the best through water in nature. So often, most lights that have blue, they purposely keep blue in the light because it penetrates the water better, so it makes things more visible in our fish tank. That's why you'll see when like a light has a yellow or orange cast to it, it looks kind of funky. But when we have that like bluish white cast, it doesn't look as funky because it tends to appear brighter to our eyes naturally and doesn't color stain as much as like that warm hue does. So it's a matter of how light pushes down. Now, as far as plants are concerned, blue light is only minorly absorbed by plants. Yes, it absorbs some, and certain plants will absorb more. But typically when we're keeping green plants, they don't absorb a whole ton of blue light. They absorb lots of white and red. So that excess blue light is what the algae gets to take advantage of. It's just like if we way overfeed our fish, it puts too many phosphates in the water, and that becomes a nutrient that the plants aren't uptaking enough of, and algae can take advantage of that, and you get tons of hair algae, right? These are all algae cares about, because it's a single cell organism, is one thing that's in excess that it can latch onto and feed off of. And if it gets that one thing, that's when you have big algae blooms. So the color of light is kind of simple. You have a spectrum of light naturally, like daylight, even though we would say it's like roughly 6,500 Kelvin. There's a spectrum of color within that white light that we preserve coming from the giant fusion reactor in the sky that we call the sun. When we try to simulate that in lighting, we have found over time that just shining white light does not produce the same effect as creating a spectrum of light. So we'll typically represent that spectrum of light with reds, greens, blues, or pinks, or rather, like these are kind of the colors that you'll use. And then you'll have a warm white, which is typically about 5,000 or between 4,500 and 5,500 Kelvin. Most commonly, it's 4,500 to 5,000 Kelvin. Then you'll have a bright white, which is typically between 5,500 and 6,500 to 7,000 Kelvin. Most commonly, it is either 6,500 or 6,000 Kelvin, because that's as close as like the daylight color temperature that's out there. And then you'll have cool white, which is more blue toned. That is typically anywhere between 7,500 Kelvin and 10,000 Kelvin, which Kelvin is just a color. It's a way to grade color temperature. It sounds really sciencey. Just ignore that. The higher it is, the cooler the temperature. The lower it is, the warmer. So like you would see that like the lower number means that you're going more yellows and oranges and reds, and the higher the number, the more blues, right? And you'll see that in white light. You'll see that shift. So we typically represent it with multiple white lights in high quality lighting. In lower quality lighting, you'll have one cast or another. It'll either be warmer or cooler overall. And all you're trying to do is simulate what comes from the sun in its rays, because we have found over time that with just white light, it is not enough to simulate the spectrum of radiation that is coming from sunlight for plants and fish. So we don't get as great a color on our fish or as great a health in our plants using only white light. An example would be if you go buy those marine land lights that are sold at Petco still that only shoot white, they will not grow plants all that well. If you go buy a fluval, or you want to go real crazy and get like a twin star or something like that, despite the fact that there is a diffuser that is helping, there's actually lots of different colored LEDs in there creating a nice spectrum of light that is trying its best to mimic sunlight. So that's really all that the different colors are there for, is it's just a way in technology for us to try to simulate nature better. That's it. There's really no major difference. I mean, other than like certain spectrums of light are better absorbed by plants than others, where algae will absorb any spectrum of light. And most commonly, if you turn your blue spectrum down, because all the blues are always an actinic light, which is what we use in the reef hobby to penetrate down to corals, that's not used very much by freshwater because sunlight is so powerful, right? So like the par, I've said this example before, the par out of a fluval light is only a few hundred. But let's say that like at the very top level of water, let's say the fluval's right on top of the water, let's say for some reason it was 400 par, which it's not, but let's say it was that number. Well, on a shady day in Seattle in the fall, the light under a tree at a stream is going to be 4,000 par from the sun. Not to mention at the height of noon on a bright sunny day when it's going to be more like 7,000 to 8,000 par. So it's just so significantly more powerful a light that white light that we perceive, which actually is a whole color spectrum, punches way further down into the water than what we're doing with LED lights. So part of how we simulate that is we tend to push a spectrum of lights to simulate nature, and we'll push more blue because it pushes, because of its frequency, which is just how big the curve is in the waveform, which this is getting way too much science, I know, I'm sorry. But blue pushes farther down and loses less light due to diffraction in the water than other color spectrums. So typically you'll see a lot of lights, and like the blue will be pushed really high, and all the rest of the colors will be kind of low in those curves. Like here's a great example, right? We'll pull up the Kessel chart, and you'll see like they're trying to push all three of them pretty high right in here, where if we look at, say, the fluval chart, this is why I always tell people, like, turn your blues down. Notice the blue spectrum's really high, and like the greens, yellows, and reds are like half, right? As far as like how powerful it is. This is why I'm always telling, like, you turn your blue down in a fluval light, and you're going to get less algae, because that excess light is what the algae is taking advantage of, and the plants are not. And that's what algae only needs, one thing, and it can go hog wild on you. So if you turn that blue down and get it more in line with like these reds and yellows and this green, the plants are actually going to like fight off the algae, and the algae is going to have, you only have little dust algae on the glass and stuff like that, but you're not going to have big balls of hair algae or lots of blackbeard algae all over the place, because there's not that excess of light for it to feed off of. There's your science lesson for the day. On light. I know, I'm insane. And the Kessels are nice lights, but they're drastically overcosted for what you get. They have a horrible feature set in software, which they could easily fix. And instead, they want you to buy a light that is like $450 to get the feature set technology-wise in a wireless app without buying an extra $100 controller that you get in a $140 or $150 light from Fluval. Oh man, I cannot talk in speed at radio voice doing science. It's tough. It's tough. I would have to like prep that in an edited video where I can sit and work at it. Radio voice is much broken, especially when I'm get some schmutz up in here from some weird summer cold. Like, it's been really weird in Seattle. Our weather has gone like bright, sunny, and dry to constantly misting rain for a day and a half to like bright, sunny, and dry again. So like the barometric pressure is just like waffling all over the place. And that's just a surefire like
you're gonna get a sinus infection or some nonsense like that. Like my girlfriend right now is dealing with an ear infection because of all that barometric pressure going all over the place, and like I've got some meh up in my nose because of it. It sucks. But yeah, I mean, like there's the science on lights. It's fun. That's why how light works from the science versions of the aquarium world. I'm certainly no Neil deGrasse Tyson. That man's awesome. That man makes like science seem like a kid can do it, and he's talking like theoretical astrophysics, which is crazy. Like, guys, great. Anyway, I hope y'all enjoyed. If you did miss the earlier part of the stream, please just go rewatch it. Maybe leave a comment, leave a like, one of those things. I would really appreciate those. But more importantly, if you want full details on the experiment that's coming up, where we're going to put a Kessel tuna sun directly against the Fluval, directly against the biggest, baddest, most ridiculous machine on the planet, the UNS Titan 1. You'll get the full details on exactly how I'm going to run this experiment, what the parameters are, and what we're going to look at, and also how insane a person I am when it comes to testing things from a professional level, because I am a professional hardware and software tester. So I'm actually going to take what I do for a living and apply it to fish. How crazy is that? So thank you guys. I really appreciate everybody coming out. There's a lot of super chats. I really appreciate it for the new project. You guys are super sweet. As always, like I only ever ask for your time, and I appreciate those of you who watch all the stuff. It's really appreciated. Time is very valuable to me, and you guys giving me your time is all that I ever ask for. So that being said, one last question. Is planaria, the little white worms, dangerous in your tank? Nope. Now, you could argue that some planaria can be potentially dangerous for shrimp, although with a lot of people I've talked to, no one has ever seen a planaria kill a shrimp. For the people that I've talked to. That being said, I'm sure there are cases of it. So in general, I would say no, planaria are not a problem. You're just a sign of excess food. With that question being said, thank you so much for watching, guys. Thank you for joining the August live stream. And as always, stay awesome. I have to hit the button to stop the stream. It's not like a video where I can edit this out.